He didn't ask for the money. He took it. The gang leader grabbed the elderly cashier by the collar, yanked her halfway across the counter, and laughed. The kind of laugh that had nothing funny in it. Then he drove his fist straight into the register, cracking the glass, scattering bills across the wet floor like something worthless. The young waiter stepped forward. Just one step. That was enough. One punch dropped him like a sack of flour. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 20 people sat frozen in their seats, staring at their plates, pretending they were somewhere else entirely. If that were your mother behind that counter, if that were your kid on the floor, what would you do? That's the question Ariana Mercer asked herself in the 2 seconds before she walked out of that kitchen. She didn't come out empty-handed. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if something in this moves you, leave a like. It means more than you know. Now, let's get back to Chicago. The iron skillet had been dying for 3 years before that night, and Ariana Mercer knew it. She knew it the way you know a tooth is going bad. Not all at once, but in small, persistent throbs that get worse when the weather turns cold. The lunch receipts didn't lie. The repair bills didn't lie. The walk-in freezer that wheezed like an old man every time she opened it definitely didn't lie. She'd patched it with electrical tape twice already, which was exactly the kind of thing her mother would have done, and exactly the kind of thing that made Ariana feel like she was slowly becoming her mother, which wasn't a bad thing, she told herself, but it wasn't the plan either. The plan had been culinary school in New York, a stint in a real kitchen, something with white tablecloths and wine lists. She'd gotten as far as the application before her mother's first stroke, and after that, the plan became something she carried around in the back of her mind like a folded piece of paper she never quite threw away. That was 7 years ago. Now she was 30, running a diner that smelled like coffee and bacon grease with a staff of 4. Rosa the waitress, who was 53 and had been there since Ariana's mother opened the place. Marcus the young waiter, who was trying to save enough for community college. Pete, who washed dishes and didn't talk much but always showed up. And Elena, the part-time cashier, who was 68 years old and treated every customer like they were her own grandchild. The iron skillet sat on the corner of 2 streets that the city planners had forgotten about. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous so much as it was tired. Tired buildings. Tired sidewalks. Tired people who needed somewhere warm to sit with a decent meal that didn't cost them a week's worth of dignity. Ariana had kept the prices the same as her mother's prices. She'd been told, by 2 different accountants over 6 years, that this was financial suicide. She'd nodded at both of them and kept the prices the same. On a Thursday night in January, with sleet hammering the windows and a wind that came off Lake Michigan like a personal insult, the diner had maybe a dozen customers, truck drivers, a few construction guys still in their work jackets, an older couple in the corner who came in every Thursday without fail and always split the pot roast, and in the back booth, alone, a man in a worn leather jacket eating beef stew and not looking at anything in particular. Ariana barely noticed him. She was in the kitchen, working on tomorrow's prep, when she heard the door open. She heard it not because the bell above the door was particularly loud, but because of the way the air changed. It was the sound of 6 people entering a space that wasn't made for them. Too loud, too much. The particular social pressure of men who've decided in advance that they own every room they walk into. She didn't go out right away. She listened. She heard Rosa's voice go careful and flat the way it did when she was nervous. She heard boots on the tile, chairs being moved without asking. She heard laughter that had a sharp edge to it. She stayed in the kitchen. She kept her hands moving, slicing, stacking, covering. She told herself it was probably nothing, probably just loud guys who'd been drinking. The neighborhood had plenty of those, and most of them ate their food and paid and left without incident. Then she heard Rosa say, very quietly, "Sir, please," and she heard the sound that followed. It wasn't a crash exactly. It was more like a deliberate impact, something breaking on purpose. Ariana set down her knife. She walked to the pass-through window and looked out into the dining room. There were 6 of them. Young, the oldest maybe 25, wearing the particular combination of colors that anyone who'd grown up in this neighborhood recognized immediately. The Vargas crew had been operating on the South Side for 2 years, running protection rackets and carjackings. and everyone knew they'd recently started working under the Moretti organization. Everyone also knew that the Moretti organization was systematically moving through the neighborhood, squeezing every small business that couldn't fight back. Ariana had heard all of this. She just hadn't expected them to walk through her door on a Thursday night in January. The leader, she figured him for the leader because he was doing the most talking, and the others were watching him the way people watch someone they're afraid to contradict, was maybe 23. He had a scar running along his jaw, and the particular look of someone who had confused cruelty with power for so long that he couldn't tell the difference anymore. He'd ordered steaks. All 6 of them had ordered, and Rosa had brought the food because what else do you do? And they'd eaten, messily, deliberately, making a show of wasting things. And now the plates were empty, and the leader was leaning back in his chair, looking at Rosa like she was furniture he didn't like. "We're not paying," he said. Just like that, flat and easy. Rosa said something Ariana couldn't hear. Her voice was too quiet. The leader laughed. He looked at the guy next to him and laughed again, and the other guy laughed too, and then all 6 of them were laughing, and Rosa just stood there holding her order pad like a shield. "You know what this neighborhood is?" the leader said, loud enough now that the whole room could hear. "This neighborhood is ours. You're ours. You think this little grease trap is still standing because of your cooking?" He waved his hand at the room. "You're standing because we let you stand." The other customers were staring at their plates. The older couple in the corner, the Thursday pot roast couple, the woman had her hand on her husband's arm and was squeezing it. He looked like he wanted to stand up. She was preventing him, which was probably saving his life. Marcus, the young waiter, was 20 years old and had a good heart and not enough experience to know when to stay back. He stepped forward from the service station and said, "Hey man, you need to pay the bill and leave." The leader looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Ariana's stomach dropped. Then he stood up, very calmly, and hit Marcus once in the face. Marcus went down hard. He hit the tile floor and didn't get up immediately, and the sound of it, that specific sound, went through Ariana like electricity. She was already moving. The cast iron skillet had been her mother's, 16 inches, seasoned black, over 30 years of use, heavy enough that most people needed 2 hands. Ariana had been cooking with it since she was 12. She grabbed it off the hook above the stove and walked out of the kitchen without breaking stride, without stopping to think, without asking herself the reasonable questions a reasonable person might ask, like what she was going to do with a frying pan against 6 men. She hit the gang leader in the shoulder with everything she had. The skillet connected with a sound that was somehow quieter than she expected and louder than she could have imagined at the same time. He went sideways, crashed into the table, and the table went over with him, plates and glasses everywhere. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then Ariana raised the skillet and looked at the remaining 5. "Get out of my restaurant." Her voice was completely level. She didn't yell it. She didn't need to. One of them lunged for her. She sidestepped. She'd been navigating a small kitchen her entire adult life. She knew how to move in tight spaces. And caught him across the forearm with the edge of the pan. He swore and pulled back. The leader was getting up. His shoulder was wrong. She'd hit him harder than she realized. And his face had gone from laughing to something much colder. He looked at her the way people look at something they've decided to destroy. "You have no idea what you just did," he said. "I asked you to leave," Ariana said. "Now I'm telling you." Rosa had moved. Smart woman. She'd gotten herself behind the counter. Pete had appeared from the back somewhere. Marcus was starting to push himself up from the floor, one hand pressed to his face. The leader picked up a bar stool. Ariana didn't wait. She moved toward him, which was the last thing he expected, and the unpredictability of it bought her 2 seconds. 2 seconds in which she'd gotten close enough that the stool was too long to swing effectively, and she caught him across the ribs with the flat of the skillet. He dropped the stool. The other 5 were looking at each other, doing the fast, silent calculation that groups of people do when the situation has gone somewhere none of them prepared for. "Door's right there," Ariana said. They went. Not gracefully. Not without threats. The leader said things on his way out that she would not let herself repeat. Things about coming back, about what was going to happen to her, to the restaurant, specific and detailed things that told her he meant every word. But they went. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Then the Thursday pot roast woman started crying softly, with her hand over her mouth, and her husband put his arm around her, and Ariana realized her own hands were shaking. She set the skillet down on the nearest table. She looked at Marcus, who was sitting up now, holding his jaw, eyes watering. You okay? Think so? He touched his face gingerly. My tooth might be. We'll figure it out. Can you walk? Yeah. Rosa, call the police. Pete, get some ice for Marcus. She started to turn back toward the kitchen and then stopped because she realized she'd forgotten the man in the back booth. He was still there. He hadn't moved. He was sitting with both hands on the table, his beef stew barely touched, watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not fear, not shock exactly. Something more like careful attention, the way a person watches something they find genuinely surprising. His jacket was worn leather, and he had maybe a week's worth of stubble, and there was nothing about him that announced anything. But there was something in the stillness of him. The way he'd sat through all of that without flinching, without running, without doing the things people do when they're scared, that made Ariana's skin prick. She almost said something to him. She wasn't sure what. Then Rosa was calling her name, and the police were already on their way, and the moment passed. She went back to the kitchen and stood at the sink and ran cold water over her hands and watched them shake for about 30 seconds, which was all the time she was willing to give it. Then she dried her hands and started cleaning up. The police came, took a report, nodded in the ways that police nod when they're in a neighborhood where they know their reports don't lead anywhere, and left. Marcus refused the hospital, which Ariana didn't agree with but couldn't force. Rosa stayed to help clean up. Pete swept glass for an hour without being asked. By the time the diner was closed and the last lights were off, and Ariana was walking to her car in the parking lot, it was past midnight and the sleet had turned to actual snow. She sat in the car for a few minutes before she started it. Her shoulder hurt. She hadn't noticed it during, she'd been too focused, too hot with adrenaline. But now it was making itself known, a deep ache from the recoil of swinging that skillet. She'd probably strained something. She thought about the leader's face when he'd said, "Come back." She didn't doubt him. The drive home took 12 minutes. Her apartment was 3 rooms above a dry cleaner that had been closed for 2 years, and it smelled faintly of chemicals that she'd stopped noticing 6 months in. She heated soup she didn't really want, sat at her kitchen table, and looked at her phone. There were 12 text messages from her cousin in Atlanta, who'd somehow already heard. There was a voicemail from her accountant. There was nothing from anyone she could call right now and say what she was actually thinking, which was, "I am more scared than I let myself be at the restaurant, and I don't know how to fix this." She didn't call anyone. She ate the soup. She went to bed. She lay in the dark for a long time listening to the city outside her window, which never really went quiet, and thought about her mother. Her mother had run the iron skillet for 26 years and had never, as far as Ariana knew, once backed down from anything. She'd buried her husband when Ariana was 9 and kept the restaurant open the following Monday because the bills didn't stop and people needed to eat. And grief, her mother believed, was something you carried while you worked, not something you stopped working for. Ariana had spent most of her 20s resenting that about her. It had taken her mother's death to understand it. She reached over and set her alarm for 5:30. She had prep to do in the morning. She didn't sleep well, which she'd expected. What she hadn't expected was to arrive at the diner at 6 in the morning and find that something was wrong. Or rather, something was right. Exactly, precisely, inexplicably right. Every broken plate had been replaced. The shattered glass from the display case was gone, and the case itself had been repaired. Not patched, repaired, with new glass fitted properly. The table that had been overturned and cracked when the gang leader crashed into it was gone, replaced by an identical one, and the replacement was actually in better condition than the original had been. The register, the one that had been smashed, sat on the counter, and when Ariana opened the drawer, she found not only the original cash from the night before, but an additional envelope, unmarked, containing what appeared to be several $100s. She stood in the middle of her own dining room and turned around slowly. Everything was exactly as it should be, except it shouldn't have been. It had been wrecked 10 hours ago, and there was no reasonable explanation for what she was looking at. She called the alarm company. The overnight record showed no entry, no alarm activation. Either someone had gotten in and out without triggering a single sensor, which her system, admittedly outdated, was not supposed to allow, or someone had access to the override code. She stood behind the counter and thought about the man in the back booth, the one with the expensive watch he'd kept covered under his sleeve. She hadn't thought she'd noticed the watch until just now, but she had. Her brain had filed it away without telling her, the the way it sometimes did with things that seemed wrong but not immediately dangerous. A man with an expensive watch, eating beef stew alone in a diner on the south side of Chicago on a Thursday night in January, wearing a jacket he didn't need to wear. He hadn't run when 6 gang members started breaking things. He hadn't hidden under the table, hadn't called for help, hadn't done anything except sit very still and watch Ariana with that careful, unreadable expression. She picked up the envelope of cash and set it down. She did not believe in coincidences. Her mother had raised her not to, in that practical, no-nonsense way her mother had. Things don't happen for no reason, her mother used to say, while also insisting that God had nothing to do with it. Reasons are human, Ari. Somebody always wants something. Somebody had repaired her restaurant overnight. Somebody had returned her stolen register money plus extra. And the only person she couldn't explain from the night before was the man in the back booth who had sat through everything and walked out before the police arrived. She needed to find him. She had absolutely no idea how to do that. Rosa arrived at 7, took one look at the dining room, and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. "Did you do this?" she finally asked. "No." Rosa looked at the register, looked at the new table, looked at the glass in the display case. "Ariana, I know. Somebody came in here last night after we left and fixed everything. I know. And left money. I know, Rosa." Rosa sat down on one of the stools, which was unusual. She almost never sat during work hours, considered it unprofessional. She sat down and folded her hands and said quietly, "Are you scared?" Ariana thought about the honest answer, which was yes, but not of whoever did this. What scared her was that someone had the resources and the access and the motivation to do this without being asked and without leaving a name, and that suggested a level of power that she had no context for. She said, "I'm going to find out who did it." Rosa looked at her. "Why?" "Because I need to know." "Why?" Rosa said again, and there was something in her voice, a particular kind of older woman patience, that made Ariana stop. "Because I don't want to owe anyone anything I don't understand," Ariana said finally. Rosa nodded slowly. "That," she said, "is exactly what your mother would have said." Marcus came in at 8 with a bruise covering half his jaw and one tooth fractured but not gone, which he was apparently treating as good news. Pete arrived without comment and went straight to the back. The Thursday couple, the pot roast couple, called to check if Ariana was okay, which she hadn't expected and which, standing in her kitchen at 8:15 in the morning, made her eyes sting in a way she refused to acknowledge. By 9 o'clock, the breakfast rush had started. By 9:30, Ariana had served 47 plates of eggs. By 10, she had decided that whoever had fixed her restaurant, whatever they wanted, whatever the cost, she was going to find them. She was going to look them in the eye. She was going to say thank you, and then she was going to say, "Don't do this again without asking me first." Because nobody, not her landlord, not her accountant, not a restaurant full of silent customers, and certainly not a mysterious stranger with a hidden expensive watch, got to make decisions about her life without her knowing about it. Her mother had taught her that too. "You don't owe anyone a debt you didn't agree to take on," her mother had said once, while washing dishes late at night, speaking to no one in particular the way she sometimes did. But if someone helps you without being asked, you find out why. Because kindness that hides its face is still wearing a mask. Ariana had been 12 when she heard that. She'd never forgotten it. She turned the burner up under the cast iron skillet, her mother's skillet, back on its hook, right where it belonged, and got back to work. She had a restaurant to run, and a man to find. The second day started the way bad days usually do, quietly and then all at once. Ariana had spent most of the morning asking questions she had no business asking. She'd called 2 people she knew from the neighborhood, people who'd been around long enough to know things without looking like they knew things, and she'd described the man from the back booth as precisely as she could. Worn leather jacket, dark hair going gray at the temples. Maybe 40, maybe older, hard to tell. The kind of stillness that didn't feel like calm so much as it felt like control. The first person she called said they didn't know anyone like that and hung up faster than was polite. The second person said, "Ariana, baby, I love you, but stop asking about men who eat alone and don't run when things go sideways. That's not a person you want to find." She thanked them and hung up and went back to work. By noon, the lunch crowd had come and gone, And the diner was in the quiet middle stretch of the afternoon when the front door opened and 3 of the 6 from the night before walked in. Not all 6. 3. Without the leader, which somehow made it worse rather than better, because it meant the leader was somewhere else. And the 3 who'd come back had come back specifically without him, which had the feel of a message being delivered by people who hadn't written it. Rosa saw them first. She was at the counter refilling salt shakers, and she went absolutely still in a way that Ariana, watching from the pass-through, recognized immediately. Rosa had a particular stillness that was nothing like peace. It was the stillness of someone who has decided to be very small and very quiet. Ariana came out of the kitchen. She didn't bring the skillet. She made that choice deliberately. Not because she wasn't scared, but because she didn't want to escalate something that might still be diffusable. She came out with her hands empty and her apron on and stood at the end of the counter and looked at the 3 of them. The one in front was maybe 20, with a thin scar through his eyebrow and eyes that moved too fast, cataloging the room the way people do when they've been trained to notice exits. He looked at Ariana with something that wasn't quite aggression. It was more like assessment, like he was measuring her for something. "We're not here for trouble," he said. "Then you picked the wrong restaurant," Ariana said. "People who aren't here for trouble don't usually come back the day after they were here for trouble." He almost smiled. "Marcus Teller, your waiter. He's got a cousin, right? Devin Teller. Devin owes a certain amount of money to certain people." Ariana felt the floor tilt slightly under her feet, the way it does when a situation reveals itself to be larger than it appeared. "I don't know anything about that," she said. "We know. We just thought Marcus should know that the money's been moved to a timeline." He paused. 3 days. "That's a message for Marcus, not for me." "Marcus works for you." The young man with the scar looked around the diner, at Rosa, still not moving, at Pete, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway, at the 2 customers who had found their shoes very interesting. "A lot of people work for you. A lot of people eat here. Would be a shame if any of them had a problem." Ariana looked at him for a long moment. 3 days, he said again. Then the 3 of them left. They didn't order anything, didn't touch anything, didn't look back. The door closed. Rosa set down the salt shaker very carefully. "Ariana," she said, "don't." "You need to—" "I said don't, Rosa." She went back into the kitchen and stood at the stove with her back to the door and breathed. Just breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her mother had taught her when she was a child prone to tantrums. Count to 6 before you do anything, Ari, because the first 4 seconds of anger are almost always wrong. She counted to 6. She was still furious, but she was thinking clearly. She turned around and called for Marcus. He came from the back, still carrying the slight stiffness in his jaw from last night, and when he saw her face, he stopped in the doorway. "What happened?" he said. "Sit down." Ariana shook. "Marcus, sit down." He sat on the stool near the prep table. He was 20 years old, and he had the face of someone who already knew what she was going to say, which told her everything she needed to know about how much he'd already known and hadn't told her. "Devin," she said. Marcus closed his eyes. "How much?" she said. "It's not—" He stopped. Started again. "It's complicated." "How much, Marcus?" He told her. The number was not catastrophic in absolute terms, but it was catastrophic in neighborhood terms, and catastrophic in the kind of people Devin apparently borrowed from terms. Devin had gotten involved with some low-level Vargas crew dealings 8 months ago, borrowed money that was supposed to be paid back in 30 days, and had been rolling the debt forward ever since while the interest compounded in the particular unregulated way that loan shark interest compounds. "Does he know they came here?" Ariana said. "I'll call him. I'm asking if he knows." Marcus was quiet. "He sent them here," Ariana said. "Not a question. He didn't send them exactly. He maybe told someone that I worked at a place on Carmody Street and that the owner—" He stopped. "That the owner what?" Marcus looked at his hands. "That you'd fight for your people. That you weren't the kind of person who'd let something happen to someone who worked for you." Ariana sat with that for a moment. "He used you as collateral," she said. "He's my cousin." "He used you as collateral, Marcus. Do you understand that?" Marcus didn't say anything. His jaw was working the way it does when a person is trying very hard not to cry and has decided that crying would be worse than whatever alternative exists. Ariana looked at him for a long moment. 20 years old, Good grades in high school, Rosa had told her once. Mother worked 2 jobs, trying to do it right. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, we deal with this, but I need you to tell me everything, all of it. I can't help either of you if I'm working with half the picture. He told her all of it. It took about 20 minutes and involved several details she wished she didn't know. When he was finished, Ariana got up, poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of him, and drank half of hers standing at the counter. 3 days, she said. I know. How much of it can Devin get together? Maybe a quarter of it. She did the math. He's short by a lot. Yeah. And if he's short, they're not going to send him a late notice, Marcus said quietly. Ariana set her cup down. I have some money saved. It's not enough. And even if it were, I'm not sure I should be. Don't, Marcus said sharply, and she stopped, because it was the first time she'd ever heard him use that tone, and it landed differently than she expected. I'm not letting you use your savings for this. I didn't ask for that. I know you didn't. Then don't. Marcus, no. He stood up. He was taller than her by several inches, and when he stood, the whole shape of him changed somehow. Less like a kid trying to keep it together and more like someone who'd been trying very hard not to be the person he was afraid of becoming. I'll figure it out. This is on me and Devin, not on you. You're on my staff. I'm an employee, that's different. Not in this restaurant, it isn't. He looked at her with an expression she recognized because she'd worn it herself. The look of someone who is deeply uncomfortable with being cared for and can't quite explain why. Finish your shift, she said. We'll talk more tonight. He nodded once and went back out to the floor. Ariana stood in the kitchen and thought about Devin Teller, whom she'd never met, and about the Vargas crew, whom she was rapidly coming to understand as a problem that was not going to resolve itself, and about the man in the back booth whose name she still didn't know. The diner closed at 9 on weeknights. By 8:30, Rosa had her coat on and was hovering near the door with the particular energy of someone who wants to say something important and is waiting for the right moment that is not coming. Say it, Ariana told her. You need to go to the police. I filed a report last night. I mean, really go. Sit down with someone. Tell them about the visit today, about Devin, about the police in this neighborhood are going to file another report, Rosa. That's what they do. They file reports. Ariana, you know I'm right. Rosa pulled her coat tighter. She was 53 and had worked in this diner for 21 years and had seen things that Ariana had only heard about secondhand. And the look on her face right now was not the look of someone who disagreed. It was the look of someone who agreed and hated that they agreed. Your mother, Rosa said, and stopped. What about her? Your mother was fearless, but she was also careful. She knew the difference between brave and stupid. I know the difference. Do you? Rosa looked at her directly. Because brave is what happened last night. What you're doing right now, keeping Marcus on, getting involved in Devin's thing, asking around about that man. She paused. Asking around about men who sit through gang violence without blinking is closer to stupid. Good night, Rosa, Ariana said. Rosa left. Ariana turned the lights down in the front of the restaurant and sat in the kitchen for a long time. Doing the kind of thinking that doesn't produce answers so much as it produces clarity about how many questions you're not able to answer. She was still sitting there when the window above the service door exploded inward. Not broke. Exploded. Something came through it. She didn't have time to see what, and then there was smoke, which she understood in the first 2 seconds was from a canister of some kind, not fire. And then the front door came open and they were inside before she could get to the phone. There were more of them this time. She counted 8 before the smoke made counting difficult. They had the particular organized quality of people who'd done this before, moving through the restaurant with a practiced efficiency that the 6 from the night before had lacked entirely. These were not kids throwing weight around. These were adults with a plan. The leader from the night before came through the door last. His shoulder was taped. She could see the brace under his jacket. And his expression had moved past anger into something quieter and more deliberate that was significantly more frightening than anger. You should have taken the loss, he said. Ariana had backed herself to the kitchen doorway. Behind her was every tool she knew, the pans, the knives, the pot of soup still hot from dinner service on the back burner. Her mind was doing the rapid inventory that it had apparently learned to do overnight, and what it was telling her was, 8 against 1 are bad odds, regardless of how good you are with a skillet. Where's Marcus? She said. She hadn't heard him leave. She didn't know if he was still in the building. Your waiter went home 20 minutes ago. Smart kid. The leader picked up a salt shaker from the nearest table and turned it in his fingers. You're not smart. I've been told. You hit me with a pan in front of my people. He set the salt shaker down. You understand what that means? I understand you think it means something. He moved fast for a man with a taped shoulder. He covered the distance between them in maybe 2 seconds, and she moved. She had to move. Standing still wasn't an option. And she got past him by inches, got her hand on the handle of the cast iron skillet, swung it around in the tight space of the kitchen doorway. He caught her wrist. Not the skillet. Her wrist. And he was stronger than she'd realized, or she was more tired than she'd known, because he held it, and the skillet stayed in her hand, but she couldn't move it, and they stood there in the doorway of her mother's kitchen, with 8 of his people fanning out behind him. And Ariana could feel the shake starting in her arm that wasn't adrenaline anymore. It was simple physics. He was stronger, and she'd been awake for 16 hours, and this was going to end badly. Let go of my wrist, she said. Put down the pan. Let go of my wrist. You keep saying that. Because you keep not doing it. Something changed in his face. Not softness. Nothing like softness. More like a flicker of something that might have been, in a different life, respect. It lasted about a second before it was gone again. You are going to pay for every cent of Devon Teller's debt, he said, plus the cost of my shoulder, plus what it cost me in front of my people. You're going to pay it, or this building won't... He stopped. He stopped mid-sentence, which was not something Ariana expected, and she felt his grip on her wrist go slightly uncertain, and she turned her head enough to see what he was looking at. The man from the back booth was standing at the front door. He'd come in so quietly that no one had heard him, which should have been impossible with 8 people in the room, and yet here he was, standing just inside the door with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the scene in front of him with the same careful, unhurried expression that he'd worn the night before. The leader's grip on Ariana's wrist loosened fractionally. "Who the hell are you?" he said. The man looked around the room. He looked at each of the 8 people in a methodical way, like he was reading a document. He looked at Ariana last, and something in his expression shifted, only slightly, only for a moment, before he looked back at the leader. "I'm someone who was going to let this situation resolve itself," he said. His voice was low and even, with the faint trace of an accent she couldn't place. "I came back because I wanted to see if she'd manage it." "If I'd manage what?" Ariana said. "Them." He nodded toward the 8. "You were doing well until the wrist. Thank you for the feedback." The leader released her wrist. Not because he was afraid, or not only because he was afraid, but because the man at the door had done something that Ariana couldn't precisely identify. He'd shifted the room. The way the temperature of a space shifts when a window opens, except nothing had opened. Something had just changed. The 8 men who'd been fanning out across the restaurant had stopped moving. They were looking at each other in the fast, silent way that groups look at each other when they need information from the group about whether they should be scared. "You don't know who you're..." the leader started. "Vargas Crew." The man said it flatly, like reading a label. "Working under Moretti now, which means you answer to somebody who is going to be very unhappy when he hears you came back to a place you already visited when I asked the problem to stop." The leader went very still. "You asked..." He stopped. His voice had changed pitch slightly. "That was you, the repairs." "I was very clear," the man said. "I said the problem was done. I said it once because I don't generally feel the need to say things twice. And yet..." He gestured at the broken window, the smoke still drifting near the ceiling, the general destruction of the front half of the diner. "Here we are." One of the 8 in the back said something under his breath to the man next to him. Ariana couldn't hear what it was, but she saw both of their faces when they said it, and the blood had gone out of them in a way that wasn't performance. "Who are you?" the leader said. Quieter now. The certainty had drained out of his voice, and what was left sounded younger and less sure of itself. The man took one hand out of his jacket pocket. He didn't do anything with it, just moved it, just let it be visible. And somehow, that was enough. The leader took a step backward. He wasn't aware he'd done it, Ariana thought. It was pure instinct. "Leave before you disappear," the man said. 4 words. The leader looked at his people. They were already moving, not panicking. They were too trained for panic, but the efficient forward organization of their arrival had reversed itself into a rapid and orderly retreat. Chairs scraped. The back 2 were already out the door. The leader looked at Ariana. He said nothing, but his eyes said several things, and most of them were promises. Then he was gone. The door swung shut. The room was so quiet that Ariana could hear the gas pilot on the stove clicking behind her. She turned and looked at the man. He was looking back at her with that same expression, watchful, measuring, and something underneath both of those things that she couldn't name. "You're going to tell me who you are," she said. Her voice was steadier than she had any right to expect. "Yes," he said, "right now." "I know. Because you walked in here and you did whatever that was, and those 8 men left, and I still have a broken window and a kitchen full of smoke, and I need to know—" Her voice cracked, just slightly. She pressed through it. "I need to know who has been making decisions about my restaurant without asking me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the nearest table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. Not with any drama, just sat, like someone who had decided that this conversation was going to take a while and saw no reason to have it standing up. "My name is Damian Volkov," he said. The name hit the air, and Ariana watched it land, and for a second she didn't know why it landed the way it did. With that particular weight, that slight echo of recognition from somewhere she couldn't immediately locate. And then she located it. She'd heard that name twice. Once from a detective she'd dated briefly 3 years ago, who'd said it the way people say the names of things they'd rather not think about. And once from Rosa 4 months ago, when a story came on the news about a federal investigation into organized crime in Chicago that had apparently produced very little. And Rosa had shaken her head at the screen and said, "Of course nothing happened. You think they're going to touch Volkov?" Ariana had said, "Who?" And Rosa had changed the subject. She stood in the smoky kitchen doorway of her mother's restaurant and looked at the man who was apparently the answer to that question and said nothing for what felt like a long time. "You're the—" She stopped. "Yes," he said. "You're the head of—" "Yes. And you were eating beef stew in my diner on a Thursday night." Something crossed his face that was almost, not quite, a smile. "Your beef stew is very good." "Don't," she said. He didn't. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat because her legs were starting to make the case that standing wasn't strictly necessary. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at him directly and said, "The repairs, the money in the register, that was you." "Yes." "I didn't ask for that." "No." "I don't want to owe you anything." "You don't owe me anything." "Then why—" "Because I was sitting in that booth when they came in," he said, "and I watched you walk out of that kitchen with a cast iron skillet." He paused. "I've been in a great many rooms with a great many dangerous people. I have never seen someone move the way you moved. Not because you were skilled, because you were completely unwilling to accept the alternative." Ariana stared at him. "That's not a reason to fix my restaurant," she said. "No," he agreed. "The reason I fixed your restaurant is because the Vargas crew came to your restaurant because of something in my territory. The Moretti organization has been moving into neighborhoods under my umbrella. The Vargas crew works for Moretti now. That means what happened here happened in part because of a war I am fighting, and you were collateral damage in that war without ever having agreed to be." "So it was guilt," she said. "It was responsibility." "What's the difference?" "Guilt is about how you feel," he said. "Responsibility is about what you owe." Ariana looked at him for a long time. "Marcus's cousin," she said. "Devin Teller. They gave him 3 days." "I know." "Can you—" "Already handled." She blinked. "When?" "This afternoon. The debt has been absorbed." He said it the way someone says the dry cleaning has been picked up. Flat, administrative. "Absorbed," she repeated. "Removed from their books. Devin Teller doesn't owe the Vargas crew anything as of this evening." "And in exchange?" He looked at her steadily. "Nothing." "That's not how this works," she said. "No," he said. "Generally it isn't." "Then why is it how this works?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone buying time, the quiet of someone deciding how true they want to be. Your mother's name was Carol Mercer, he said. The name landed differently than his had. It landed the way names of the dead always land, with that additional weight, that half second of recalibration. Yes, Ariana said carefully. She ran this restaurant for 26 years. Yes. 22 years ago, Damien said, I was 17 years old, and I had been shot twice, and I was bleeding into the gutter on Carmody Street at 2 in the morning, and a woman came out of this restaurant and pulled me inside. The room was very quiet. Ariana did not move. She hid me in the walk-in cooler, he said. She called no one. She stitched the wounds herself with a kit she kept under the counter. I never asked her why she had it. I was in no position to ask questions. She gave me soup and a dry jacket, and she sat on a crate next to me until I stopped shaking. He paused. In the morning, she let me out through the back. She told me she didn't want to know my name or my business, and that she expected me never to bring either one through her front door again. She never told me, Ariana said. Her voice was someone else's voice. She wouldn't have, Damien said. That's not the kind of woman she was. How do you know what kind of woman she was? Because I've had 22 years to watch from a distance, he said. Because I looked for her after I was in a position to look for people, and when I found her, she'd built exactly the kind of life I would have expected. And when I found out she was gone, he stopped. The silence stretched. I'm sorry, he said. And it was the most human thing he'd said yet, and somehow the most unsettling, because it sounded true. Ariana stood up. She wasn't sure when she'd decided to stand. She walked to the broken window and looked out at the empty street, the snow coming down now in the kind of heavy, serious way that meant it wasn't stopping anytime soon. Her mother had saved this man's life. This man, this feared, powerful, dangerous man who had just dispersed 8 armed people with 4 words, had been a bleeding 17-year-old in her mother's walk-in cooler, and her mother had said nothing, ever, not once. She was careful with her kindnesses, Ariana said, mostly to herself. What? Something she used to say. Be careful with your kindnesses. People remember them longer than you think, and not always in the ways you expect. She turned around. Damien Volkov was watching her from across the room, and for the first time since he'd walked through the door, she looked at him, really looked at him. Not as a threat, not as a mystery, but as whatever he actually was. A man who had been 17 and frightened and had been pulled from a gutter by her mother. A man who had become something that her mother probably would have hated. A man who had apparently spent 2 decades keeping watch over a diner on Carmody Street because he didn't know how else to pay a debt. She would have been furious at what you became, Ariana said. He held her gaze. I know. She would have told you to your face. I know that too. I'm going to tell you to your face. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not offense, something more like readiness. The posture of a man who has decided he will accept whatever is coming. The Moretti organization, she said. They're not done. Those men tonight weren't the end. No. And the Vargas crew is going to keep hitting soft targets until Moretti tells them to stop, or until they can't. Yes. And my diner is a soft target. It won't be. Not now. Because of you. Because of me. Ariana looked at the broken window, at the smoke still hanging near the ceiling, at the salt shakers that had been knocked to the floor, at the tracks people's boots had left in the scattered grime. I don't want your protection, she said. I understand. But those men are coming back regardless. Yes, he said. They are. She turned to face him. So tell me what's actually coming, she said. Not the version you'd tell someone to make them feel better. The real version. Damien Volkov looked at her across the wreckage of her mother's restaurant, and for the first time, Ariana saw something in his face that she hadn't seen in the 2 nights she'd now spent looking at him. He looked tired. Not physically. Or not only physically. The kind of tired that accumulates over years of being the thing everyone else is afraid of and never being able to put it down. The Moretti organization has decided this neighborhood is their next expansion, he said. They've been working outward from the north side for 18 months. The Vargas crew is their ground force. Their method is to target businesses that are known for community value, places people depend on, because the destruction of those places sends a message that Moretti's reach extends further than my protection does. He paused. Your diner is on a list. It was on the list before Thursday night. What happened Thursday night moved it to the top. Because I hit their man with a skillet, Ariana said flatly. Because you showed the neighborhood that someone here won't be intimidated. For Moretti, that's a problem that needs to be corrected publicly. So they're going to come back in force. Yes. When? Soon, he said. Possibly tomorrow. Possibly tonight. Ariana looked at the clock on the wall. It was 10:40. The snow was heavy outside. You need to close the restaurant, he said. Temporarily. A few days. No. Ariana, this restaurant has been open 6 days a week for 31 years. It was open 3 days after my mother had her first stroke. It was open the week she died. It is not closing because some organization that doesn't own this street has decided they want to make an example of me. That is either the bravest or the most dangerous thing I've heard someone say in recent memory. It's neither, she said. It's just the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. Then we have a different kind of problem, he said. Because they will come, and they will not come with 8 men, and a cast iron skillet. I know what a cast iron skillet can and can't do, she said sharply. Then you know you need— I need to know, she said, cutting him off, that my staff is safe. Marcus, Rosa, Pete, Elena. Those 4 people come in here every day and they depend on this place, and I am not— Her voice cracked again, more than slightly this time, and she let it because she was past the point of managing it. I am not letting anything happen to them. Damien was quiet. That's what you're asking for, he said. Not a question. Yes. Not for yourself. If it were just me, I'd figure it out. He nodded slowly. All right, he said. Your staff will be protected. I'll have people here. Not visibly. He paused. What? If you have men standing outside this restaurant, Rosa will quit on principle, and Marcus will think it's his fault, and the customers won't come. Not visibly. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, the one where she'd said something he hadn't anticipated, and he was revising some internal calculation. Not visibly, he repeated. Whatever you do it where I don't have to explain it to anyone. That's an unusual set of conditions. It's my restaurant, she said. Those are my conditions. The clock ticked. The snow fell. The smoke near the ceiling had mostly cleared, and what was left was just the ordinary smell of a kitchen that had cooked a lot of food for a lot of years. Damien Volkov, the most feared man in Chicago, looked at Ariana Mercer across the table in her dead mother's diner and said, "You're not going to make any of this simple, are you?" "My mother never made anything simple," Ariana said. "I guess it's inherited." Something crossed his face, that not quite smile again, and was gone. He stood. "The window will be repaired before morning," he said. "I'll repair it myself." "Ariana, I'll repair it myself," she said again. "Thank you for tonight. Now go." He went. She stood in the quiet wreckage of the dining room and listened to his footsteps recede and the door close and the sound of the city absorbing him the way the city absorbs everything, without ceremony, without— She repaired the window herself. It took her until 2 in the morning, a roll of heavy-gauge plastic sheeting from the storage room, a staple gun, and a stubbornness that she recognized, somewhere in the back of her mind, as probably excessive. The frame had cracked when the canister came through, so she couldn't set glass tonight. That would need a proper repair. But she could seal the opening, and she did, working by the light of her phone propped against a sugar dispenser, her breath fogging in the cold air that poured through until she got the plastic up. When she was done, she stood back and looked at it. It looked terrible. She left it anyway. She locked up, drove home, showered, and sat at her kitchen table with a glass of water she didn't drink, and thought about a woman pulling a bleeding 17-year-old off the street and hiding him in a walk-in cooler and never saying a word about it to anyone. Her mother had been a private person in the way that very strong people sometimes are. Not secretive exactly, but economical with the things she considered hers. She'd kept certain things inside a perimeter that Ariana had respected without fully understanding, and now she was starting to understand that the perimeter had been larger than she'd realized, that there were rooms in her mother's life she'd never been shown. She didn't know how to feel about that. She knew how she felt about Damien Volkov, which was several things simultaneously, none of them simple, and she knew that the intersection of those feelings with what she'd just learned was going to require more processing than one sleepless night could provide. She went to bed at 3 and was up at 5:15 because her body had apparently decided that sleep was no longer something she was entitled to. She made coffee. She looked at her phone. She drove to the restaurant. The plastic sheeting was still up. The street was quiet under 6 inches of fresh snow. The sign above the door, Iron Skillet, in the slightly crooked letters that her mother had painted herself 31 years ago and that Ariana had never had the heart to redo, was lit the way it was always lit, a warm orange that bled into the dark. She unlocked the door and went inside and started the prep for the day. Rosa arrived at 7 and looked at the plastic sheeting and said nothing, which was worse than if she'd said something. Marcus came in at 8. He looked better than he had yesterday. The bruising on his jaw had deepened to purple, but the swelling had gone down. And he moved through his opening routine with the deliberate focus of someone who has decided that routine is the best available anchor. At 8:40, he stopped beside her at the prep station and said, "Devin called me this morning." Ariana kept her hands moving. "And?" "He said the debt's gone. He didn't know who. He said a man called him and told him the number was cleared and not to ask questions." "Good." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That was him, wasn't it? The man from the booth. Focus on the carrots, Marcus." "Ariana, it's handled. That's what matters." "It's not." He stopped. Started again, more carefully. "Things don't just get handled like that. Not in this neighborhood. Not with those people. Someone cleared Devin's debt with the Vargas crew, and that means someone has leverage over the Vargas crew, and I need to know what that costs." She put down her knife and turned to face him. "It doesn't cost you anything," she said. "Or Devin. I need you to believe that." "How do you know?" She held his gaze. "Because I asked." Marcus looked at her for a long time. He was 20 years old and smarter than his age, and she could see him doing the math, the same math she'd done the night before, the same arithmetic of power and debt, and nothing is free that everyone in this neighborhood learned to run automatically. "Who is he?" Marcus said. "Someone who has complicated reasons for being here." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have right now. Will you let me have it for a little while longer?" He didn't want to. She could see that clearly. But he picked up his knife and went back to work, and she counted that as trust she hadn't entirely earned. The morning rush came and went. By 11, the diner had the brief, peaceful quality it sometimes got between rushes, the kitchen warm and fragrant, the dining room humming with the low conversation of the last few breakfast customers, the radio playing something from the 70s that Rosa sang along to under her breath without knowing she was doing it. Ariana was at the back counter doing the ordering when the man in the gray suit came in. She noticed him because he was wrong for the room in the specific way that certain people are wrong for certain rooms. Not aggressive, not threatening, just definitionally out of place. His suit was expensive and pressed, and he had the groomed, deliberate look of someone who worked in a building with a lobby and a doorman, and he moved through the diner with the slightly careful gait of a person navigating terrain they'd chosen rather than territory they knew. He sat at the counter. He ordered coffee, which Rosa brought. He looked at the menu for a few minutes and ordered nothing else. Then he said quietly to Rosa, "Is the owner in?" Rosa looked at him. "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Carver. I'm with the city." He put a business card on the counter. "I'd like 5 minutes of her time." Ariana came out of the kitchen. She'd heard the exchange through the pass-through, and she'd taken the 10 seconds it bought her to make some rapid assessments. City, groomed, unannounced, mid-morning on a weekday. None of those things pointed in particularly comfortable directions. Ms. Mercer. He stood, which she hadn't expected. "Thank you for seeing me." "You haven't told me why you're here yet," she said. "May I?" He gestured at the nearest booth. They sat. Rosa drifted to the far end of the counter with the practiced discretion of someone who had learned over decades to be present without appearing to be. Carver had pale eyes, and a face that had been trained into neutrality so completely that the training itself was visible, like a wall that was too smooth. He set a folder on the table but didn't open it. "You had an incident Thursday night," he said. "I filed a report." "2 incidents, actually, Thursday and Friday." "I know how many incidents I had." He nodded, as though she'd confirmed something. "We've been aware of increased Vargas crew activity in this corridor for about 6 weeks. The incidents at your restaurant are consistent with their recent pattern of targeting anchor businesses in neighborhoods they're moving into." He paused. "We have reason to believe the Vargas crew is operating under direction from the Moretti organization." "I've been told that," she said carefully. He looked at her. By whom? People talk in this neighborhood. He held her gaze for a beat too long. Ms. Mercer, are you aware of the name Damien Volkov? Her hands were flat on the table. She kept them still. I've heard the name. Have you had any contact with Mr. Volkov or with anyone associated with his organization? The question landed with a precision that told her it wasn't a general inquiry. It was a specific one, aimed at something he already suspected. Why? She said. Because Mr. Volkov's territory and the Moretti organization's expansion zone overlap directly in this neighborhood. And because when two organizations of that size are in active conflict, the people between them tend to have a difficult time. He opened the folder, pushed a photograph across the table. This was taken outside your restaurant at 1:47 Friday morning. She looked at the photograph. It was grainy, surveillance quality, taken from a distance, but it was clear enough. A black car parked across from the diner, and coming out of the diner's front door, a figure that was identifiable, even in bad light, as the man who'd sat in her back booth. Her stomach did something complicated. I don't know who that is, she said. Carver looked at her. I had a break-in Friday night, she said. Several men. I don't know who came by afterward. Ms. Mercer. His voice was still pleasant, still level, but something had changed in its texture, a slight addition of weight. I'm not here to cause you a problem. I'm here because you are a civilian who appears to have come into contact with Damien Volkov. And in our experience, civilians who come into contact with Damien Volkov benefit from understanding what that contact means. What does it mean? He folded his hands on the table. It means you're inside a situation that has nothing to do with your restaurant, your staff, or your neighborhood, except that your neighborhood has become the battlefield. He paused. It means that whatever Mr. Volkov has told you, offered you, or done for you, it is not without a cost that he will eventually present. He told me the same thing I'm telling you, she said, that I don't owe him anything. And you believed him. I didn't say that. Carver almost smiled. It was the first genuinely human expression he'd produced. No, I don't think you did. He slid another paper across the table. Not a photograph this time. A list. These are 14 businesses in a 4-mile radius of your location. All of them had contact with Mr. Volkov in the past 3 years. All of them were initially told there were no strings attached. She didn't look at the paper. She looked at him. What happened to them? Most of them are fine, he said. Genuinely. Volkov doesn't use people the way Moretti does. But most of them are now, in one way or another, inside his orbit. They take his deliveries, or they employ people he vouches for, or they simply understand that their continued operation is contingent on his goodwill. He paused. It's subtle. It's not violent, but it is what it is. She looked at the list. 14 names. She recognized 3 of them. Good places. Places she'd been to herself. What do you want from me? She said. Information, he said. If Mr. Volkov contacts you again, and he will, we'd like to know what he says, what he's planning, anything that might give us insight into how he's going to respond to the Moretti expansion. The ask landed clean and clear, and she sat with it for a moment. You want me to be an informant, she said. I want you to protect yourself and your business by giving us information that helps us end a conflict that is going to get worse before it gets better. And in exchange, protection, legal protection. If the Vargas crew or anyone associated with Moretti brings any further action against this business, we will respond in a way that a police report does not currently allow us to do. Ariana looked at the photo, looked at the list, looked at Carver's carefully neutral face. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. He stood. He put a second card on the table, so this one with a handwritten number on the back. Anytime, day or night. He left. Rosa was at her side before the door had finished closing. How much did you hear? Ariana said. Everything. And? Rosa sat down in the seat Carver had vacated and put her hands on the table and said, I think you need to call a lawyer. I don't have a lawyer. Then I think you need to get one. She didn't call a lawyer. What she did was close the restaurant at 2 in the afternoon. She told Marcus and Rosa she had a supplier meeting, which was close enough to a lie that it sat badly. And she drove to the address she'd looked up that morning. She'd found it the way she found most things she wasn't supposed to find. Through the combination of public records, a property search, and the specific stubbornness that had once led her to track down a black market spice supplier in a suburb of Detroit, because she'd decided she needed a particular kind of dried pepper and wasn't going to be told no. The building was a skyscraper in the business district, glass and steel, one of those buildings that announces itself through sheer vertical confidence. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk staffed by two men in jackets that were slightly too structured to be purely decorative. She walked up to the desk and said, "Damien Volkov. Tell him Ariana Mercer is here." The man behind the desk looked at her with the particular professional blankness of security people who have been trained to evaluate threats and have clocked her as somewhere between confused tourist and someone they might actually need to call about. "Is he expecting you?" "No," she said. "But tell him anyway." There was a phone call. A brief exchange she couldn't hear. A pause that lasted long enough that she had time to notice the security camera in the upper corner of the lobby was pointed directly at her, and to resist the urge to look away from it. Then, 42nd floor, Ms. Mercer. Mr. Volkov will see you. The elevator was fast and silent and opened directly into a space that took her a moment to process. Not an office exactly, or not only an office. A floor-through space with windows on three sides, looking out over Chicago, the lake a flat gray line in the distance. The city spread below like something drawn by hand. Damien was standing at the far window with his back to the elevator. He turned when she came in. He was dressed differently than she'd seen him. A dark jacket, no tie, the general appearance of someone who ran things from a room rather than a street corner. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. "You found this address," he said. "Property records aren't sealed." "No," he said, "but most people don't know to look, or don't want to." "I'm not most people." He moved toward the seating area, two couches and a low table that probably cost more than her monthly revenue, and gestured. She didn't sit. He didn't push it. "Someone came to see me today," she said. "A man named Carver. He said he was with the city." Something shifted in Damien's face. It was quick, very quick, but she caught it. "What did he want?" he said. "Information about you, in exchange for protection from Moretti." "What did you tell him?" "That I'd think about it." Damien was quiet for a moment. "He's not with the city," he said. "I assumed he wasn't exactly with the city. He's federal, task force, specifically assembled for—" He stopped. "What he told you about the businesses on his list, was it accurate?" The question surprised her. She'd expected a denial, or a redirect, or the particular verbal agility of someone who'd spent years answering questions without answering them. "You're not going to tell me it's not true?" she said. "It's partially true," he said. "The framing is designed to alarm you, but the underlying facts are not incorrect." She stared at him. "So those businesses, they are inside your orbit?" "Most of them, yes. Because you helped them. Because I helped them." "And you're going to tell me that was voluntary, that no one was pressured?" "No one was pressured," he said. "But I understand why you don't believe that." "Damien." She said his name for the first time, and it landed oddly in the air between them. "I have a federal agent sitting in my diner asking me to spy on you. I have a gang that's coming back. I have a staff of 4 people who have nothing to do with any of this, and I have a restaurant that my mother built with 30 years of her life." She stopped, steadied. "I need to know exactly what I'm in the middle of, not a piece of it, all of it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and stood looking out at the city, and she had the sudden impression that this was what he looked like when he was deciding to tell the truth. Not a performance, not a strategy, just a man looking at the thing he'd built from a distance and deciding what he owed. "The Moretti organization has been planning this expansion for 2 years," he said. "They're not just taking neighborhoods, they're dismantling infrastructure, the businesses, hold communities together. Because a destabilized neighborhood is easier to control than a stable one." He paused. "Your diner is on their list not because you hit their man with a pan, though that didn't help. It's on the list because it's a place people depend on. Destroy it, and you destroy something that holds the block together." "And you," she said. "What do you want?" He turned from the window. "To stop them." "That's not all." "No," he said. "It's not all." She waited. "I want what they're destroying to still exist when they're stopped," he said. "I want the neighborhood to still be the neighborhood." He paused. I want your restaurant to still be open. Because of my mother, she said. Yes. And if she'd never helped you, would you care? The silence that followed was the most honest thing he'd said yet, because it was the pause of someone who didn't know the answer rather than someone calculating the best answer. I don't know, he said. She respected that more than she wanted to. Carver is going to come back, she said. Yes. And if I don't give him what he wants, he's going to find another way to pressure me. Most likely. Which means I need to be useful enough to you that having me pressured costs Carver something. And I need to be clean enough from your side that he can't actually use me. Damien looked at her. That's a very precise analysis. I'm a chef, she said. I'm used to working with what I have. She turned toward the elevator. Ariana. His voice stopped her. She turned. If you walk out of here without agreeing to let me help you properly, the next time Moretti comes to your diner, I may not be eating beef stew in the back booth. I know, she said. Then, I know, she said again. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need a day. She held his gaze. One day. I need to think about who I'm becoming. She took the elevator down. The marble lobby absorbed her footsteps. The two men at the security desk said nothing. She drove back to the south side in the gray afternoon with the heat on high and the radio off, and the particular feeling she associated with decisions that had already been made. The lightness of them and the weight. Rosa called her at 6:15. Ariana was in her apartment, still in her work clothes, eating toast because she'd forgotten to eat anything real since breakfast, and she answered on the second ring. You need to come, Rosa said. Something in her voice made Ariana's toast go down wrong. What happened? Just come. She drove the 12 minutes in 8. She knew before she turned onto Carmody Street because she could see the light from 2 blocks away. Not the warm orange of the iron skillet sign, but something harsher and brighter and moving. She parked half on the curb. The front of the restaurant was intact. That registered first. The windows were whole, the door was closed. The plastic sheeting she'd put up was still in place on the repaired window. From the outside, it looked exactly like her restaurant on any ordinary evening. But Rosa was standing on the sidewalk in her coat, and Pete was beside her, and Marcus was on his phone with his back to the door. And Elena, 68-year-old Elena, who had worked here since Ariana's mother hired her, and who treated every customer like family. Elena was sitting on the front step with both hands wrapped around a paper cup of something, looking at the ground. Ariana got out of the car. Rosa came to her immediately. She took Ariana's arm, which Rosa never did, physical contact being something Rosa managed carefully. Don't go in yet, Rosa said. What happened? Someone was inside. When? The alarm? The alarm didn't go off. Rosa's voice was very controlled in the way that very controlled voices get when the control is the only thing holding the structure together. Whoever it was knew the code. The only people who know the code are... She stopped. Rosa looked at her. The only people who know the code, Ariana said slowly, are me, and you, and Marcus, and Elena. None of them said anything. They didn't break anything, Rosa said. They didn't steal anything. They just... She stopped. You need to go look, but prepare yourself. Ariana went inside. The dining room was exactly as they'd left it after close. Tables set for morning service, chairs up on half of them, the floor clean, the counter gleaming, the register closed. She walked through to the kitchen. Everything in the kitchen was as it should be, except the wall above the prep station, the wall where her mother had hung the framed photograph that had been there for 30 years, the one of Carol Mercer on the day she'd opened the restaurant, standing in the doorway in her apron with the sign being hung behind her, squinting into the sun and half laughing at whoever was holding the camera. That photograph was still there, but someone had left something underneath it. On the prep table, placed with a deliberateness that turned Ariana's stomach, was Marcus's community college acceptance letter, the one she'd known he kept in his locker because he'd shown it to her 2 weeks ago, proud and trying not to show he was proud. It had been unfolded and laid flat. Next to it was Elena's medication list. Ariana recognized it because Elena kept a copy tucked in the back of the cash drawer in case of emergency. Hypertension, a blood thinner, a dosage schedule. Next to that was a photograph, a printed photograph, clearly pulled from social media, of Rosa's daughter. Rosa's 26-year-old daughter who lived in Evanston and taught second grade, and whose existence Rosa protected with the particular ferocity of a woman who had decided her child would live in a different world than the one Rosa worked in. No note, no message, no explanation. They didn't need to leave one. Ariana stood at the prep table and looked at the 4 items for a long time. Then she walked back outside. Marcus was off his phone. He looked at her face and went very still. "Someone was in here," she said. Her voice was flat. She was keeping it flat deliberately. "They went through your locker, Marcus. They have your information, Elena's information, and something on Rosa." Nobody spoke. "This was Moretti," she said. "Not Vargas Crew." This was Moretti directly, because Vargas Crew doesn't move like this. "This is a message, and it's specifically aimed at me." She looked at each of them. "They want me to understand that they can reach all of you." Elena had stood up from the step. She was holding her paper cup with both hands and looking at Ariana with an expression that was heartbreaking, not because it was afraid, but because it wasn't. It was steady and patient and waiting. "Tell me what you need from us," Elena said. Ariana looked at her. 68 years old, bad knees, the blood thinner on that list. "I need you to go home tonight," Ariana said. "All of you. I need you to let me handle tomorrow." "What does that mean?" Marcus said. "It means I'm going to make a call." She pulled out her phone. "And it means the restaurant is going to look a little different for a while. And it means that some things I've been trying to do on my own terms are about to stop being on my own terms." "Ariana," Rosa started. "I know," Ariana said. "I know what it means." She looked at the photograph of her mother over the prep table, squinting into the sun, half laughing, standing in the doorway of the thing she was building. Then she dialed. He answered on the second ring. "They were inside my restaurant," she said. "They left messages for my staff, specific personal messages." She stopped. "I need you to know that I understand what I'm agreeing to. I'm not confused about it, and I'm not doing it because I'm scared, even though I am scared." She stopped again. Shorter pause. "I'm doing it because they put Elena's medication schedule on my prep table next to my mother's photograph, and I will not let that stand." Damien said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different than it had been in his office. Something had changed in it. Something had been stripped back. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. "There's one more thing," she said. "Tell me." "The alarm code. Someone on your end gave them the alarm code to my restaurant." Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that, afterward. "Which means someone on your end has been inside my restaurant without my knowledge, possibly more than once. And I need you to tell me who that is before you come here, or I swear I will meet you at the door with the skillet, and I will not be aiming for your shoulder." The silence that followed was the longest he'd ever given her. "I don't know who it is yet," he said, "but I will before I get there." 20 minutes, she said. She hung up. She looked at her staff, Rosa with her arms crossed, Marcus with his jaw set, Pete who had appeared from somewhere and was standing slightly behind the others with his hands in his pockets, Elena with her paper cup and her steady eyes. "Go home," Ariana said. "Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone you don't know." She looked at Marcus specifically. "Call Devin. Tell him to stay inside tonight." They went. Not without argument. Rosa argued the longest, in the precise and structured way Rosa argued when she knew she was going to lose but felt the argument was worth making on principle. Ariana let her make it. Then Rosa went. And Ariana stood alone in her mother's kitchen, under her mother's photograph, and waited. She didn't pray. She didn't cry. She didn't do any of the things that the moment might have invited if she'd been the kind of person who let moments dictate her responses. She turned on the stove. She put water on to boil because she didn't know what else to do with her hands, and because her mother had always believed that a kitchen should be working, and because in 20 minutes a man was going to walk through her door and tell her that someone he trusted had given her alarm code to the people who had left her staff's personal information on her prep table, and she needed to be doing something useful with her hands when that happened, or she was going to break. The water started to heat. The pilot light clicked. Outside on Carmody Street, a car turned onto the block and its headlights swept across the front windows of the iron skillet, and Ariana looked up at her mother's photograph and thought, "I understand now. Now why you didn't tell me. Some things you carry so that the people you love don't have to." Then she thought, "But I'm the one standing here," and she set her jaw and she waited for the door to open, and when it did, she was already turned around and facing it, because she had stopped letting things happen behind her back the moment she'd walked out of this kitchen with a cast-iron skillet in her hand, and she was not about to start again now. He came in 18 minutes, not 20. Ariana heard the car before she saw the headlights. A low, fast sound, the kind of engine that doesn't announce itself so much as it arrives. Then the door opened and Damien walked in, and behind him came two men she hadn't seen before. And the change in the room was immediate and physical, like barometric pressure dropping before a storm. She looked at him across the kitchen. "The code," she said. He stopped in the doorway between the dining room and the kitchen. He looked at her for one long moment, and then he said a name. "Victor Lenko. He's been on my security detail for 4 years. Was, Ariana said. Was. Where is he now? No longer a concern. She didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. How long has he been feeding information to Moretti? We believe 14 months. Which means Moretti has had access to everything Victor knew about your operation for over a year. Yes. Including whatever he knew about my restaurant. Including that. She turned back to the stove. The water was boiling. She didn't need boiling water for anything, but she turned the burner down rather than off, because having something to do with her hands was still better than not having something to do with her hands. What does that mean for us? She said. Right now. Tonight. Damien came fully into the kitchen. The two men stayed in the dining room, which she registered without looking. It means Moretti knows more about my planned response than I would like. It means tonight's breach wasn't random. They were here specifically to send a message before they move. Move how? All-out assault on this block. He said it the same way he'd said everything else. Level, factual, stripped of performance. Moretti has been positioning for 3 days. Victor's information gave them the timeline they needed. They know I'm going to respond to the action against your restaurant, so they're going to hit before I can consolidate. When? Tonight, possibly the next few hours. She turned around. She looked at him. Really looked. The way she'd been making herself look at things clearly since Thursday night, without the buffer of denial or distance. He looked back with that same deliberate steadiness, and she thought about what Rosa had said about brave and stupid, and she thought about Elena's medication list on her prep table, and she thought about her mother pulling a bleeding teenager off the street and asking no questions. What do you need from me? She said. Something shifted in his face. Right now, I need you somewhere safe. That's not what I asked. Ariana, I know this building, she said. Every door, every crawl space, every exit, and every corner. My mother built this place, and I've spent 30 years inside it. If they're coming here, they're using this block as a kill zone, he said flatly. Not just your restaurant, the whole block, 3 buildings. They want to create enough chaos that emergency services are overwhelmed, and they can move on my warehouse on the river in the confusion. So my restaurant is a distraction. Your restaurant is the trigger point. They know I'll defend it. They're using that. She stared at him. They're using me to draw you out, she said. Yes. And you knew this was a possibility when you decided to... She stopped herself. The anger came up fast and hot, and she pressed it back down, not because it wasn't valid, but because there wasn't time. We deal with that later, she said. Yes, he said. Who's in the buildings on either side? He looked at her. Mr. Okafor on the left. He has the hardware store. He went home 2 hours ago. The laundromat on the right has been closed since Tuesday. We believe Moretti has already placed people inside. The laundromat owner. Safe. I had someone move her this afternoon when we started understanding Moretti's pattern. You moved people without telling them why. I told them there was a credible threat. I told them enough to get them to leave. And Okafor? He's with his daughter in Bridgeport. She exhaled. The Thursday couple. The pot roast people. They live above the pharmacy 3 blocks down. Already contacted, he said. They're staying with family tonight. She stopped. How many people did you move today? 11, he said. Quietly, without explanation where possible. She looked at him. I've been watching this neighborhood for 22 years, he said. I know who lives where. She didn't have an answer for that wasn't complicated, so she didn't answer it. My staff, I have people with Rosa and with Elena. Marcus is with his cousin. He paused. Pete didn't go straight home. He's at a bar on Weston. I have someone there. Pete, she said, with a feeling that was almost like laughing and was nothing like funny. He drinks on Tuesdays. It's apparently a consistent pattern. She turned away, put her hands on the edge of the prep table, and looked at her mother's photograph. The woman in the photograph was squinting into the sun and half laughing, and had no idea that 31 years later her kitchen would be the center of something that had nothing and everything to do with the kind of woman she'd been. "Tell me the plan," Ariana said. "My team holds the primary entrance. We have 3 men already positioned in the building above, the vacant floor. 2 more covering the alley. The alley has a drainage problem at the northeast corner, so water pools there, freezes in winter. It's been like that for 10 years. If someone comes through fast, they're going to hit that patch and go down." Damien looked at her. "I'm telling you because it matters," she said. "Your people should know." He turned his head slightly and said something in a low voice to the man nearest the dining room door. The man nodded and stepped away with his phone. "The kitchen has 2 exits," Ariana said. "The service door to the left of the freezer and the window above the utility sink. The window is painted shut, but it'll break clean. Single pane, the frame is rotted at the bottom left corner. If someone needs to get out fast and the service door is blocked, that window is the way." "How do you know the frame is rotted?" "Because I've been meaning to fix it for 8 months and keep not doing it." She paused. "The walk-in cooler has a manual release on the inside. If anyone gets locked in, show me." She showed him. They moved through her kitchen together, the kitchen she'd cooked in for 7 years, the kitchen she could navigate blind. And she pointed at every structural thing she knew, every weakness and workaround and idiosyncrasy that came from years of operating in a space that was perpetually underfunded and perpetually hers. He listened without interrupting, and she noticed that he remembered everything immediately, not writing it down, not asking her to repeat anything, just absorbing it the way people absorb things when their survival has historically depended on absorbing information quickly. When she was done, they were standing near the back door. "You should go," he said. "I know this building better than your people do." "That's true, and it doesn't change my answer." "Damien." She said his name the same way she'd said it in his office, with the weight of someone deploying a word deliberately. "If I leave, and they burn this place down, and your people hold the entrance, but nobody knows about the drainage problem in the alley, or the window above the utility sink, or the thing with the walk-in cooler, we'd manage." "My mother's photograph is on that wall," she said, "and her skillet is on that hook, and I am not leaving those things in a building that is about to become a battlefield while I sit somewhere and wait to hear what happened." The silence between them was different than the silences had been before. Less calculating, more something she didn't have a word for. "I'm not losing you," he said. It came out without the careful tonelessness of everything else he'd said, and she could see in the slight change in his face that he hadn't entirely meant to say it. She looked at him steadily. "Then don't." His jaw tightened. He looked away first, which she noted and filed away. "Stay in the kitchen," he said. "The service door. You stay behind it unless I say otherwise. You do not go into the dining room. You do not go into the street. And if something comes through the kitchen," he turned back to her, "then use whatever you have." She looked at the cast iron skillet on its hook. "I'm familiar with that approach," she said. For 1 second, one fraction of a second, something crossed his face that was entirely human and had nothing strategic in it. Then his phone went off. He looked at it, and every human thing in his face closed down, and what was left was the thing that had made 8 armed men leave a room at 4 words. "They're moving," he said. Everything happened very fast. The 2 men in the dining room were suddenly in motion, crisp, organized, the kind of movement that comes from training that has been repeated until it's stored somewhere below thought. One went to the front door, the other went toward the back. Damien was already on the phone, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences that Ariana caught pieces of. "East approach. Confirm positions. The alley is compromised." And then the first explosion hit the parking lot. It wasn't huge. It wasn't the movies. It was a contained, directed blast that blew out the 2 cars at the far end of the lot and sent a percussion wave through the building that rattled every pan on every hook and put a fracture in the front window that she could see from the kitchen doorway. Then all the lights on the block went out. Not the restaurant's lights. Something had cut the street power, plunging the exterior into black, while the restaurant's interior held on its own circuit for about 4 seconds, and then that went too. Dark, She didn't move. She stood in her kitchen and let her eyes adjust because she'd been in this kitchen in the dark before. The power had gone out in a storm 2 years ago, and she'd been here alone, and she knew the layout by memory and touch. She heard the front door. Not an explosion this time, a specific, deliberate breach. She heard the frame split, heard the particular sound of something meant to hold giving way to something that had decided it wasn't going to hold anymore. Then voices. Low. More than 4. Moving through the dining room with the same practiced efficiency as the night before, but with more of them and more equipment and none of the hesitation. She heard Damien's voice from somewhere near the front. One word, sharp and commanding. And then sounds that she understood intellectually, but had never been in proximity to before. The sounds of people who have been trained to hurt other people doing exactly that in a small space in the dark. She pressed herself against the wall beside the service door. Her heart was doing something ridiculous, a full-body percussion that she was fairly certain was audible to anyone within 6 feet of her. Her hands were sweating. She found the skillet on its hook by memory and grip, and took it down and held it in both hands because that was the only thing she knew how to do with fear that had no other outlet. A shape came through the kitchen door. Not Damien. Not either of the men from the dining room. Someone new. Someone who'd come around through the side alley and found the service door and come through it, moving fast and low in the dark. I didn't see her immediately because she was to his left and he was moving right, toward the stove and the prep tables, the areas that showed faint ambient light from the pilot flames. She hit him with the skillet. Not the shoulder this time, the back of his knee, hard and lateral, because she'd learned from Thursday that swinging high in a small space gave too much warning. He went down without a sound, or with a sound, actually, a specific compressed grunt of someone who has had a large bone impacted. And she was already moving past him toward the service door because she had no interest in a second round with whoever that was, and the door needed to be closed and held. She got the door bolted. Behind her, the man on the floor was moving, getting up. She spun around and he was upright, and she couldn't see his face and he couldn't see hers. And for 1 second they were just 2 people in a dark kitchen, and then he lunged. She went left, tight against the freezer, the cold surface shocking even through her jacket. And his arm caught her shoulder instead of her throat, and the contact spun her and she lost the skillet, heard it hit the floor, couldn't see it. He grabbed her wrist, both hands, strong, and recovering from the knee strike faster than she would have liked. She drove her elbow into his solar plexus. It was a desperate move rather than a skilled one. She'd seen it in a self-defense video 3 years ago and had filed it under interesting but hopefully never necessary. And the angle was wrong enough that it landed on his ribs rather than his diaphragm, but it landed hard enough that his grip loosened, and that was enough. She got to the prep table. Her hand found the handle of the 8-inch chef's knife by memory, and she turned around with it in her hand and said, "I will use this." He stopped. She couldn't see his face. He couldn't see hers. They stood in the dark kitchen of the Iron Skillet on Carmody Street and breathed at each other. "Door," she said. "The one you came through, on your left. Go through it." He didn't move. "I know exactly where everything in this kitchen is," she said. "You don't. That is the only advantage that matters right now. Go through the door." He went. She didn't believe he was gone. She listened for 10 seconds, 15, heard nothing. And then she pressed herself back against the wall and let herself shake for about 4 seconds, which was as much shaking as she was going to allow, and then she stopped. The sounds from the dining room had changed. The sharp violence of the first 60 seconds had given way to something more dispersed. She could hear movement from outside, from the street, from somewhere above on the vacant floor. It sounded like more of them were coming rather than fewer, and that was not a direction she'd hoped for. Her phone was in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out and the light from the screen was almost blinding after the dark, and she killed the brightness immediately, texted Damien one word, "Kitchen clear," and pressed herself back into the corner. His reply came in 11 seconds. "Stay. East wall. Don't move." She stayed. East wall. Didn't move. What she could hear, filtered through the walls and the dark, and her own terrified heartbeat, was a battle. Not a skirmish, not the semi-organized chaos of Thursday night. A real coordinated, multi-point assault on a city block by people who had planned it carefully and were executing the plan with a thoroughness that scared her not because of the violence itself, but because of what the scale of it implied about how much Moretti wanted this. This wasn't about her restaurant. This was about sending a message to every small business, every neighborhood institution, every person who had decided to exist under the wrong organization's shadow, that there was no safe place and no protector reliable enough to matter. This was about making people feel alone. She thought about that standing in the dark kitchen with a chef's knife in her hand and her mother's photograph on the wall she couldn't see. She thought about 30 years of trucks drivers and construction workers, and Thursday couples who split pot roast and people who couldn't afford to feel unwelcome anywhere else. She thought about Carol Mercer pulling a bleeding teenager off the street because the alternative was not who she was. She pressed the skillet handle with her foot, found it, picked it up without letting go of the knife. 2 weapons were better than 1. That was a principle she felt confident about. The back door, the service door she'd bolted, shuttered. Someone on the other side. Testing it, not forcing it yet. Once, twice, then nothing. Then the window above the utility sink exploded inward. She told him about that window. She told Damien it would break clean, single-pane, rotted frame at the bottom left corner. She'd given that information to someone she was choosing to trust, and she couldn't know who else had been in the room when she said it. The window came in, and with it came cold air, and the particular smell of the winter street, and a man who was large enough that coming through a window was not his most natural movement, and who landed wrong on the utility sink and swore, in a way that would have been almost comical in any other context, and then straightened up and turned toward her. He had something in his hand that caught the faint ambient glow from outside. She threw the skillet. Not at him, at the thing in his hand. She threw it the same way she'd throw a pan of grease onto a low fire, lateral and low, and it connected with his forearm at the same moment he was raising it, and the thing in his hand discharged. A single shot that went into the ceiling, a sound that was shockingly loud in the enclosed space. And then the gun, or whatever it was, hit the floor, and she was already moving, not away from him but toward the door, because toward was the only direction that led anywhere. She got the bolt off. She got the service door open. The alley was full of people. Ariana stood in the doorway of her mother's kitchen and looked at the alley that ran along the back of the building, and she saw what Moretti's deployment actually was. Not 8 men, not 12, but a coordinated sweep team moving block to block, and the iron skillet was merely one node in a larger operation that had apparently been planned with the kind of tactical precision that a neighborhood gang did not possess, and a criminal organization that had been building power for decades did. She also saw 3 things happen at once. She saw the man who'd slipped on the drainage ice at the northeast corner of the alley, exactly where she'd told Damien's man, exactly where the water pooled and froze, go down hard and stay down. She saw 2 of Damien's people emerge from the doorway of the vacant building above and move down the fire escape with a speed that made her think of things she'd rather not think about. And she saw, at the far end of the alley, the particular silhouette that she'd been looking at across rooms and kitchen doorways and the city skyline for 3 days now, the silhouette of a man who moved with the deliberate, unhurried economy of someone who has never once in his adult life been surprised by violence. Damien was fighting in the way she imagined water fights, not against things but around them, using angles and timing and the absolute confidence of a man who had never believed he would lose something he was committed to holding. He was also outnumbered. Not badly. Not impossibly. But the math was wrong in a way that was trending in the wrong direction, and the man who had emerged from above to his right was moving with the specific focused intention of someone who has a specific focused intention, and Damien's attention was elsewhere. Ariana did not make a decision. She was past decisions. Decisions are what you make when you have time, and she was out of time, and what was left was simpler and older and more instinctive than anything you could put the word decision on. She came out of the doorway. The man to Damien's right registered her late, 1 second, maybe less, and that 1 second was the difference between what happened and what might have happened, because she caught him across the shoulder with the flat of the skillet. And the impact spun him, and his focus went from Damien to her, and then Damien was there. And the exchange lasted maybe 4 seconds, and when it was over, the man was on the ground. Damien looked at her. I was bleeding from something above his left eye. A cut, not deep, painting the left side of his face, in a dark stripe that she had an involuntary and inappropriate impulse to do something about, and he was breathing hard, which was the first time she'd seen anything in his physical presentation that suggested he was human in the ordinary way that humans are human. I told you to stay in the kitchen, he said. You were about to get hit from the right, she said. I know. Then, I know, he said again. I had it. You didn't have it. His jaw moved. You didn't have it, she said, and I had a skillet, so now you have it. Something happened in his face that she had been seeing in increments since Thursday night. A slow erosion of the careful control, a thing being revealed underneath it that was not weakness and was not sentiment, and was something she didn't have a name for yet, but recognized the way you recognize something you've been trying to locate for a long time. Then his phone went off. He looked at it, and the erosion was gone so fast she might have imagined it. The warehouse, he said. He looked at her. The Moretti boss is at the warehouse on the river. He has 3 people from our expanded network, business owners, Ariana, 3 people I am responsible for, and he is going to execute them publicly if I don't. He stopped. What does he want? She said. Surrender. My operation. Public withdrawal from everything south of the river, which means every neighborhood, every business, every person I have agreed to protect. He said it with the kind of flatness that you use to say things that are catastrophically large because the alternative is to say nothing at all. And if you don't? He kills 3 people on camera and sends it to every organization in the city to demonstrate what happens to those who oppose Moretti's expansion. She looked at him. He looked back. The 3 people, she said. Who are they? He told her. She knew 2 of the 3 names. The hardware store owner on the left, Mr. Okafor, who was supposed to be with his daughter in Bridgeport. A woman who ran a community health clinic 4 blocks away, whom Ariana knew because she'd brought food to the clinic twice a year for 3 years. A woman named Dr. Celine Torres, who was 54 years old and had been treating people in this neighborhood for 2 decades. He wasn't with his daughter, Ariana said. They got to him before we could. And the clinic, she went back, Damien said, after I had her moved. She went back for patient files she was worried about. His voice held something in it that was the closest to self-reproach she'd heard from him. She went back and they were already there. The alley was clearing. Damien's people were moving with the organized efficiency of cleanup rather than combat, and the sounds from the street had changed again. She could hear sirens now, distant but coming, which meant this was about to become someone else's problem in a way that complicated everything. We have maybe 6 minutes before first responders are on this block, he said, which means Moretti has 6 minutes to get his point made, buy it and get clear. The warehouse on the river, she said. How long? 4 minutes if we move now. She looked at the open doorway of her kitchen, looked at the alley, looked at his face with its dark stripe of blood and its expression of someone who is doing arithmetic that doesn't resolve. Go, she said. I'm coming with you. Ariana, Mr. Okafor fixed my window 2 winters ago when I couldn't afford a repairman, she said. Dr. Torres stitched Marcus's chin after he fell off a stool 3 years ago and refused to charge him. She looked at Damien. Those are my people. I'm coming. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then, stay behind me. Do exactly what I say. If I say down, you go down without asking why. His voice had gone to pure command register, no texture in it, no room for negotiation. And the skillet is coming with me. Obviously, he said, and turned and moved, and she followed him. That was the simple version of it. The longer version was that she ran through an alley behind the most dangerous man in Chicago while carrying a cast iron skillet and trying to keep her footing on ice-slicked concrete at 11:40 at night with sirens converging from 2 directions and the cold coming off the lake hard enough to make her eyes water. And the longer version also included the fact that she was not afraid in the way she'd expected to be afraid. She was afraid in a cleaner way, a specific present fear that had a shape and a direction, which was easier to move through than the shapeless dread of the past 3 days. Damien's car was at the mouth of the alley. One of his men was already behind the wheel and the engine was running, and they were moving before the doors were fully closed, pulling onto Carmody Street and then immediately off it, threading through the back grid of the neighborhood on a route that avoided the incoming emergency vehicles with a familiarity that told her this was not improvised navigation. 4 minutes, he'd said. She counted them without meaning to. The warehouse district along the Chicago River was a different world from Carmody Street, industrial, largely dark at this hour. Buildings that had been built to store things rather than to be seen. The driver pulled off the main road and onto a service track that ran parallel to the river, gravel and frozen mud under the tires, and killed the headlights without being told. They stopped. Damien was on his phone, had been on his phone for 3 of the 4 minutes. She'd caught fragments, south entrance, loading dock, confirmed the visual, and now he ended the call and looked at her in the dark of the back seat. 2 guards on the exterior, south loading dock. The main floor of the warehouse is where he'll have them. He paused. Moretti's name is Caruso, Frank Caruso. He's been running the organization's expansion personally because the operation is too important to delegate. He won't be alone inside. How many? We believe 4 to 6, plus Caruso. She nodded. Ariana. His voice had changed, not softer exactly, more direct. The kind of direct that dispenses with framing because framing takes time they didn't have. Caruso is going to use you if he sees you. You are leveraged to him in a way that is separate from the business between us. Because of your mother. Because of what she did for me. She went still. He knows about that. Victor knew. Victor told him. His jaw was tight. Which means Caruso knows that you are the one civilian in this city capable of affecting my judgment. She absorbed that. Is he right? She said. The question sat in the air between them. Damien looked at her with that expression she'd been cataloging for 5 days, the one that kept revising itself towards something she hadn't expected from him, something that had nothing to do with power or strategy or the carefully maintained architecture of a man who had built himself into something fearsome. Yes, he said. She nodded once. Then we use that. We're not using it. He expects you to keep me back, she said. He expects you to protect me by keeping me out of his line of sight. That's the expected move, and he's prepared for it. She looked at Damien. I walk in through the front. He sees me, and he's not prepared for that. You are not walking into a warehouse as a distraction. I'm walking in as the reason you're here, she said. That's different. That's the same thing. Damien. She used his name the way she'd learned to use it, as a stop, as a recalibration. Mr. Okafor fixed my window in a snowstorm because he said that's what neighbors do. Dr. Torres treated 15 people last week on a sliding scale because medicine doesn't stop being necessary because people are poor. She held his gaze. I'm not sitting in this car while Caruso decides whether they live. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I walk in first. He's expecting that. You come in 2 minutes behind. Not through the front, through the side access on the east wall. There's a personnel door. My man will unlock it. You stay inside the door. You don't advance. And if you stay inside the door unless someone is about to die, he said. That's the line. Understand? Yes. Say it. I stay inside the door unless someone is about to die. He looked at her one more second. Then he got out of the car. She counted to 120. She sat in the back seat of the idling car in the dark along the frozen river and counted slowly and deliberately and did not let herself think about what was happening inside the building during those 2 minutes. Because thinking about it would not change it and would only use up what she needed for what came after. At 120, she got out of the car. The cold hit her like a wall. The river smelled of winter and industrial runoff and the particular dampness of frozen things. Her breath came in visible bursts. She held the skillet down at her side and walked along the east wall of the warehouse, and the personnel door opened before she reached it. A man she didn't know, one of Damien's, holding it from inside, looking at her with an expression that was professional and completely failed to conceal the fact that he found this situation unusual. She went in. The warehouse was vast and cold and lit by a series of overhead industrial lights that created bright pools with deep shadow between them. The space smelled of concrete and old machinery and something metallic she didn't want to identify. Pallets along the walls, heavy shelving that reached toward the ceiling, and in the center, under the brightest cluster of lights, 4 people. Mr. Okafor she recognized immediately. His broad shoulders, his particular way of standing that was dignified even now, even with his hands bound in front of him and a cut on his forehead that had dried to a dark crust. Dr. Torres was beside him, smaller, standing with the upright posture of someone who has decided that fear will not change her carriage. The third person she didn't know? A man of maybe 60, with gray hair and the hands of someone who worked with them. And in front of them, Frank Caruso. She'd expected someone physically imposing, because the men who led organizations like Moretti's often were. Because the business selected for the particular combination of physical presence and sociopathic confidence that made rooms defer without question. Caruso was neither large nor physically commanding. He was compact, maybe 60, with gray hair cut close and the face of a man who had made difficult decisions for so long that the difficulty no longer registered. He wore a dark coat and stood with his hands clasped behind his back like a man at an art exhibit, and he was looking at Damien. Damien had come in through the main entrance, the south loading dock, and he was standing about 30 feet from Caruso with two of his own men flanking him and two of Caruso's men visible in the near shadows. And the space between the two of them had the specific quality of spaces where very large things are about to be determined. "I expected you sooner," Caruso said. "Traffic," Damien said. Caruso looked at him, not at the flanking men. At Damien specifically, with the focus of someone who has learned to read the center of a thing rather than its edges. "You've lost Victor," he said, "and whatever Victor knew, which is most of what mattered, and half of your team is currently occupied with the aftermath of what we did to Carmody Street." He tilted his head slightly. "You're not in a strong position." "You didn't bring me here to discuss positions," Damien said. "No," Caruso agreed. "I brought you here to make you understand something. This city is changing. The territories you've held, the agreements you've maintained, their legacy arrangements. They belong to a model of operation that doesn't work anymore." He gestured toward the three bound figures. "These people, their businesses, their neighborhoods, they're not yours to protect. They were never yours to protect. They're assets, and assets belong to whoever has the operational capacity to hold them." "Mr. Okafor runs a hardware store," Damien said. "He has 2 grandchildren. He worked in that neighborhood for 23 years. "Sentiment," Caruso said. Not meanly, like he was identifying a category. "Accountability," Damien said. Caruso smiled. It was the smile of someone who has heard this argument before and found it consistently unconvincing. "You want to tell me that you protect these neighborhoods out of obligation? 22 years of running the most efficient criminal organization in this city? And you want me to believe it's obligation?" He paused. "I know about Carol Mercer, Damien. I know about the diner. I know about the 17-year-old bleeding on the street and the woman who pulled him in." The smile didn't change. "I also know her daughter is on Carmody Street right now. Or was." He looked directly past Damien, at the east wall, at the personnel door, at Ariana. She didn't move. She stood inside the doorway exactly where she'd agreed to stand, and she met Frank Caruso's gaze across 30 feet of cold warehouse floor and did not look away. Caruso's expression changed. It was a small change, a slight recalibration, as though the number he'd expected to see on a page had turned out to be different. And she understood in that moment what Damien had meant about leverage, because Caruso had expected her to be kept back. He'd expected her to be the thing being protected, and the thing being protected was by definition the thing with no agency. She had not stayed in the car. She had not, technically, advanced past the door. But she was here, and her presence here was not the move Caruso had prepared for. "Ms. Mercer," he said. "Mr. Caruso," she said. A beat. "You understand what's happening here," he said. "I understand you're making a business argument using 3 people as your visual aids," she said. Caruso looked at her for a moment. "Your mother made a sentimental decision 22 years ago. You've spent 5 days making the same kind of decision." His voice wasn't cruel. That was the most unsettling thing about it. It was analytical, almost kind, in the way that people are kind about things they don't consider personal. "Sentiment is expensive in this business." "I'm not in your business," she said. "No," he said, "but you're standing in my warehouse." She took one step forward, just one. She was still inside the door, technically. "I know your financial network," she said. Caruso went very still. She didn't look at Damien. She kept her eyes on Caruso. "The Moretti organization's expansion into the South Side has been funded through a series of property shell companies registered in 3 states. I know this because a federal task force agent named Carver sat in my restaurant and told me about it, trying to get me to inform on Damien. He told me more than he probably intended to because he was trying to demonstrate how much he already knew." She paused. "He gave me names, addresses, filing numbers." "You're bluffing," Caruso said. "I wrote them down," she said, "after he left. I'm a chef. I write things down because you cannot run a kitchen on memory alone. It's in a notebook in the kitchen of the Iron Skillet on Carmody Street. She looked at him steadily. That information, given to the right people, dismantles your funding structure. Not your operation, your funding structure, which is a different and more foundational thing. Caruso looked at her. She looked back. It's also been photographed, she said, and sent to 2 email addresses not associated with me, not associated with this neighborhood, set to forward to federal investigators if the sender doesn't check in within 24 hours. She paused. The sender is my cousin in Atlanta. She has instructions. This was, in its broad outline, true. She had called her cousin at 4 in the morning 2 nights ago and told her certain things and given her certain instructions, and her cousin, who was a paralegal and had a practical and organized mind, had confirmed receipt and set up exactly what Ariana had described. She had not told Damien any of this. She had done it because Rosa had told her to call a lawyer, and she didn't have a lawyer, and because her mother had raised her to solve problems with whatever was in the kitchen. Caruso turned to Damien. You knew about this? No, Damien said. Caruso looked back at Ariana. He was doing the calculation she could almost see him doing. The math of whether she was bluffing, whether it mattered if she was, what the cost of testing it was against the cost of accepting it. You're not a player in this, he said finally. No, she agreed. I'm a chef, and I'm very tired, and I'd like those 3 people to go home. She kept her voice level and her hands still, and the skillet at her side, and she looked at Frank Caruso with everything she had. So let's finish this without anyone else getting hurt. The silence lasted long enough that she became acutely aware of the cold and the industrial lights, and the sound of the river outside, and the specific weight of the skillet in her right hand. Then Caruso said, without turning around, Untie them. It was not the end. It did not feel like the end, because it didn't come with music or relief or the clean resolution that endings have in stories. Caruso's men untied Mr. Okafor and Dr. Torres and the gray-haired man she didn't know. And the 5 people in that warehouse who had drawn a line spent the next 2 hours doing the grim administrative work of drawing it formally, because Damien had come not with a counteroffer of violence, but with the thing that Ariana hadn't known he was carrying. Documentation. 18 months of financial records, shell company registrations, wire transfers, the complete paper architecture of Moretti's expansion, assembled by people who had spent the better part of 2 years understanding that the way to dismantle a criminal organization without creating another cycle of violence was not to outmuscle it, but to outdocument it. Victor's betrayal had cost Damien tactically. It had not touched the records, because Victor had not known about them, because Damien had kept that particular operation so compartmentalized that only 2 people in his organization knew it existed. Caruso looked at what was put in front of him, and his face did not change much, but his hands changed. A slight stillness, a cessation of the unconscious movement that hands make when the mind they're attached to is processing normally. This goes to federal investigators, Damien said, and the Moretti organization spends the next 4 years in court. Or, he paused. You pull back. Completely. The Vargas crew returns to independent operation. You remove your infrastructure from every neighborhood south of the river, and you do not rebuild it. And if I don't, the documentation goes to investigators regardless. But if you don't, it also goes to every other organization in the city, along with a very detailed account of how the Moretti expansion failed. He paused. Your business runs on the perception of capability. I am offering you the option of walking away before that perception is publicly corrected. Caruso sat with it. Mr. Okafor was sitting against the warehouse wall with Dr. Torres beside him, and Dr. Torres had produced a small first aid kit from her coat pocket. She had a first aid kit in her coat pocket, which somehow did not surprise Ariana at all, and was looking at the cut on his forehead with focused professional attention. The gray-haired man was standing near the wall with his arms folded, looking at the floor with the expression of someone who is committing everything about this moment to memory. Ariana stood near the east door and watched Frank Caruso make a decision. She could see it in him. The arithmetic of a man who has spent his life calculating costs against returns, running the numbers on this new situation in which the return on continuing had just been materially reduced and the cost had substantially increased. It wasn't a moral reckoning. It wasn't regret. It was pure operational logic arriving at a different answer than it had arrived at yesterday. 6 months, Caruso said. A structured withdrawal takes 6 months. 3, Damien said. Another silence. 3, Caruso agreed. Damien nodded once, and that was it. That was how a war ended, in a cold warehouse by a frozen river at midnight, with no ceremony and no resolution that felt adequate to what it had cost. And Ariana stood by the east door and felt something go out of the air. Not peace exactly, because peace was not the immediate consequence of something like this. The immediate consequence was exhaustion. The deep structural exhaustion of a body that has been operating on adrenaline for too many consecutive hours and is now presenting the bill. She didn't say anything for a long time. She walked to Mr. Okafor and sat on the floor beside him while Dr. Torres finished with the cut, and Mr. Okafor looked at her with his dignified, battered face and said, "Your mother would have done the same thing." "She would have done it faster," Ariana said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "She would have brought food," he said. "Yeah," Ariana said. "She would have." They sat on the warehouse floor for a few minutes, the two of them, while the logistics of the rest of the night got organized around them. Dr. Torres treated 3 separate cuts, including the one above Damien's left eye, which he submitted to with the slightly impatient compliance of someone who has decided that arguing is less efficient than simply letting the doctor work. The gray-haired man turned out to be a dry cleaner from 2 miles away named Sol, who had been extended Damien's protection a year earlier after a fire, and who had been taken specifically because Caruso knew about the extension and wanted to demonstrate its limits. Sol shook Ariana's hand before he left. She didn't know what to say, so she said, "Get home safe." "Always trying," Sol said, and went. Damien's driver took Mr. Okafor and Dr. Torres. Caruso's people disappeared the way organizations like Moretti's always disappeared, efficiently and without ceremony, absorbed back into the city. The warehouse emptied over the course of about 40 minutes until only Ariana and Damien were left in the large cold space. She was sitting on a crate near the east door. The skillet was on the floor beside her. She had taken off her jacket and discovered that the sleeve had been torn sometime during the kitchen fight and hadn't noticed until now, which seemed like the kind of detail that was only possible to notice once the body had permission to notice non-critical things. Damien stood across the space. He'd gotten a towel from somewhere and had cleaned most of the blood from his face, which improved his appearance considerably while also revealing that the cut was shallower than it had looked and that he was going to have a bruise across his left cheekbone that would be visible for several days. "The notebook," he said. "Yes." "Your cousin in Atlanta?" "Yes." "You did that without telling me?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "When?" 4 in the morning, 2 nights ago, after you left the restaurant the second time. I couldn't sleep, and I had information I didn't know what to do with, and I thought, my mother used to say that if you don't know what to do with something, put it somewhere safe and wait. She paused. I put it somewhere safe and waited. I'm a chef. I'm good at timing. He crossed the space and sat on a crate across from her. They were maybe 6 feet apart. The overhead lights in this corner had one that was flickering slightly, a slow industrial pulse that was mildly hypnotic. I want to tell you something, he said. Okay. Victor's betrayal. What it cost, tactically, tonight. I was responsible for that. I built an organization that creates the conditions in which people can be turned, because loyalty bought with fear is not loyalty. It's compliance, and compliance has a price. He said it with the flat steadiness of someone who has already done the internal reckoning and is now simply reporting results. I have known that for a long time. I chose not to address it because the system worked. Until it didn't, she said. Until it didn't. He looked at his hands. What Caruso said about sentiment, about your mother's decision. He looked up. He was trying to use it as a weakness, as a reason to dismiss 22 years of what I've done in this city as personal rather than operational. He wasn't entirely wrong, Ariana said. Was he? Damien held her gaze. No, he said. He wasn't entirely wrong. She thought about that. My mother pulled a kid off the street because he needed pulling. She didn't do it because she calculated what he might become. She did it because he was bleeding and it was cold and the alternative wasn't who she was. She looked at Damien. Whatever you built in the years after that, whatever you became, that's yours. That's not her responsibility, and it's not her legacy. She paused. But the fact that you spent 22 years watching over a diner on Carmody Street because a woman was kind to you once, that part's hers. He was very still. I think, he said, that if she were here, she'd tell you to your face, Ariana said. I already told you that. You did. And then she'd probably feed you something, Ariana said, because that's what she did with complicated people. She fed them and let the food do the talking. Something in his face shifted in that way she'd been watching it shift over 5 days. The slow revelation of something underneath the architecture, something that the architecture had been built in part to protect. I'm going to make changes, he said, to how I operate, to what I operate. He said it simply, without drama, the way you say things you have already decided. It's not going to be fast. Some of it is going to be, it will be complicated, and some of it will not go cleanly. I know, she said. I'm telling you because I want you to know what you're... He stopped, started again. I want you to know what the situation actually is. I know what the situation actually is, she said. I've been paying attention. He looked at her. You're not what I thought you were the first time I saw you, he said, sitting in your back booth eating my beef stew. You thought I was a man in a booth. I thought you were a complication. And now? He looked at her for a long time, the longest look he'd given her, and he was not a man who gave short looks. Now, he said, I think you are the most clear-sighted person I have met in a very long time, and I think your mother would be furious at what I became and proud of what you are. And I think... He stopped. Say it, she said. I think I'd like to still be here in a year, he said. Not in this business, not in this city the way I've been in it. I'd like to still be in your restaurant, eating beef stew. I'd like to earn the right to that. Ariana looked at him. She thought about Rosa telling her she didn't know the difference between brave and stupid. She thought about Marcus with his community college letter. She thought about Elena's steady eyes and Mr. Okafor's dignity, and Dr. Torres with a first aid kit in her coat pocket because she'd decided the world needed that from her specifically. She thought about her mother, squinting into the sun in a photograph on a wall in a kitchen on Carmody Street, half laughing. The restaurant opens at 7, she said. Breakfast rush starts at 7:30. If you want to earn something, you can start by learning how to do prep. He stared at her. You're serious, he said. The onions won't dice themselves, she said. The silence that followed was the best kind. Not empty, but full, the particular fullness of something beginning rather than something ending. She picked up her jacket. She picked up the skillet. She stood and looked at him. Come on, she said. I need to see if my restaurant is still standing. It was. The Carmody Street block had been processed through the overnight machinery of the city's emergency response. Police tape, report taking, the boarding up of Mr. Okafor's front window, which had taken a hit sometime during the night's events. The parking lot damage was real but contained. The iron skillet itself stood exactly as it had stood for 31 years, slightly crooked sign and all, the warm orange of its interior light visible through the front windows. Somebody had fixed the plastic sheeting on the repaired window. She didn't know who. She didn't fix it. She let it be. She unlocked the front door at 5:30 in the morning and turned the lights on and stood in the middle of the dining room for a moment, looking at the tables and the chairs and the counter and the register and the walls where her mother had hung things that she'd never had the heart to move, and she breathed in the smell of the place, coffee and old wood and the ghost of 30 years of meals, and she let herself feel it for 1 full minute. Then she went into the kitchen. She put the skillet back on its hook. She started the coffee. She looked at her mother's photograph. Okay, she said to the woman squinting into the sun. I know. Damien arrived at 6. He came through the front door in the same worn leather jacket, no bodyguards, no expensive watch visible, and he looked exactly like a man who had eaten beef stew alone in a corner booth on a Thursday night in January, ordinary and watchful and entirely himself. She handed him an apron. He looked at it. You've never worn one, she said. No. There's a first time for everything, she said. He took the apron and put it on, which looked wrong and right simultaneously, and she set him to dicing onions at the prep table under her mother's photograph, and she went back to the stove. They worked in silence for a while. Real silence. The comfortable kind. The kind that doesn't ask anything. You're holding the knife wrong, she said, without turning around. I'm holding it the way I know how to hold a knife. That's a different kind of knife, she said. For this kind, you want your index finger on the spine. It gives you more control. A pause. Then, like this? She turned and looked. Better. He went back to the onions. She went back to the stove. Outside, the city was beginning its morning noise. The first buses, the first trucks, the particular pitch of a city deciding to start again, regardless of what the night had been. Snow that had fallen during the fight on Carmody Street had been cleared from the sidewalk by someone she hadn't seen, and the pavement was dark and wet and already filling with footprints. Rosa arrived at 7, took one look at Damien in an apron dicing onions under Carol Mercer's photograph, and said nothing for 15 seconds. Then she poured herself a coffee and said, to no one in particular, I'm going to need a bigger kitchen. The kitchen is fine, Ariana said. There are going to be more people in it from now on, Rosa said, still not looking at either of them specifically. I'm just noting. Marcus came in at 8 and shook Damien's hand with a directness that told Ariana he'd processed more than she'd given him credit for. And then he went to his station without drama, which she appreciated. Elena arrived at 8:15, looked at the repaired window and the cleared sidewalk and the general state of the restaurant and said, I made empanadas, and set a container on the counter, and that was Elena's version of everything she needed to say about everything that had happened. By 9:30, the breakfast rush was in full swing. The iron skillet was loud and warm and full of people, the griddle going, the coffee coming in constant rotation, the bell above the door doing its steady work. The Thursday couple came in, not on Thursday, but on whatever this morning was after whatever last night had been, and sat in their usual corner and split an order of French toast, and when Ariana brought it out herself, the woman reached up and squeezed her hand without saying anything, and Ariana squeezed back. Damien had migrated from prep to the service station, where he was doing something she couldn't see from the kitchen. She looked out through the pass-through and found him refilling coffee cups at the counter with the focused, deliberate attention of someone doing a thing they have decided to do correctly, which was, she had to turn away from the pass-through, something she was not going to address right now because the Hollandaise needed attention. The Hollandaise got attention. The morning went on. 2 weeks later, the Vargas crew's organized activity on the south side contracted noticeably, which was the kind of thing that didn't make the news but circulated through the neighborhood the way important things circulate, person to person, in small, reliable pieces. A federal investigation into the Moretti organization's financial network was announced quietly, without press conferences, which was also the kind of thing that people who knew how to read these things could interpret. Mr. Okafor reopened his hardware store 5 days after the warehouse night. He put a new sign in the window, hand-lettered, which was how he'd always done things. And on the first morning of reopening, Ariana brought breakfast for his entire staff, which consisted of himself and 2 part-time employees, and they ate in the back of the hardware store among the plumbing fixtures and paint samples. And it was, as these things sometimes are, exactly right. Dr. Torres's clinic received an anonymous donation 3 weeks after the warehouse. It was enough to fund the sliding scale program for 2 years. Dr. Torres called Ariana about it. She'd somehow intuited the general direction from which anonymous things flowed now, and said, tell him it's accepted. Tell him yourself, Ariana said. He comes in for breakfast on Tuesdays. A pause. He's learning to cook? He's learning to dice onions, Ariana said. It's a process. 6 months passed. The iron skillet was busier than it had been in 3 years. Some of this was the neighborhood's general stabilization. There's a quality that spaces have when the thing everyone has been afraid of recedes, an opening up, a return of appetite, in the most ordinary sense. People came back to places they'd quietly been avoiding. New people came. The Thursday couple started bringing their adult son on occasional Saturdays, and the adult son was vegetarian, which occasioned a minor revision of the menu that Rosa took personally for about a week before conceding that the roasted vegetable hash was actually very good. Marcus got into his community college program. The Iron Skillet threw him a party that was technically just a Tuesday dinner service, but with a cake that Elena had made and that had his name on it in slightly uneven letters that Elena had iced with visible determination. Marcus cried a little and was extremely embarrassed about it, and Pete patted him once on the shoulder, which was Pete's entire emotional vocabulary, and it was enough. Devin Teller, Marcus's cousin, came in 3 times over the course of those 6 months. The first time he sat in a corner booth and ate quietly, and left a very good tip. The second time he stayed long enough to talk to Marcus for an hour after closing, and Ariana gave them the space. The third time he asked Ariana if she needed any help on weekends, and she said she'd think about it, and she was still thinking about it, which was its own kind of answer. On a Friday evening in the early spring, after the last customer had gone and the chairs were going up on the tables, Damien came in through the front door carrying nothing, no bodyguards, which had been true for a while now, no phone in his hand, no particular expression that announced itself. He sat at the counter. She brought 2 cups of coffee without being asked. They sat in the quiet of the empty restaurant for a few minutes. Sol called me today, he said. How is he? Good, he said. The dry cleaning business is good. A pause. He asked if I wanted anything cleaned. She looked at him. What did you say? I said I'd check my closet. She almost smiled. That's progress. I sold the warehouse, he said. On the river. I sold it last week. She'd known it was coming. He'd been restructuring for months, visible to her because she'd been watching and because he told her things now with a straightforwardness she'd come to depend on. Warehouses to legitimate buyers. Distribution networks converted or dissolved. The quiet, unglamorous work of dismantling what had been built over decades and deciding which pieces were worth keeping in different forms. What did you do with it? She said. Community Development Group. They're converting it to mixed-income housing. He said it the way he said most things, factual, unadorned. But there was something in the flatness that was different from the strategic blankness of the man who had eaten beef stew in her back booth 4 months ago. It was the flatness of someone who has said a thing that matters and has decided the mattering doesn't need to be performed. Your mother would still be angry, Ariana said, if she were here, about everything before this. I know. But she'd feed you, she said. You said that before. It's still true. She looked at him over her coffee. She had this theory about food and complicated people. She said food was the most honest conversation you could have because you couldn't pretend to eat something you didn't want. What did she make for complicated people? Depended on the complication, Ariana said. For someone proud, she made something simple and did it perfectly, so they had to respect it without being able to dismiss it. For someone sad, something warm and slow-cooked, because the time it took was part of the message. She paused. For someone dangerous who needed to be reminded of what ordinary life tasted like, beef stew, he said. She looked at him. Is that why it was on the menu that night? He said. It's always on the menu in January, she said. It was my mother's January special. He was quiet for a moment. She knew I'd come back, he said. Not asking, not quite stating. She didn't know you specifically, Ariana said. She just knew that the neighborhood had people in it who needed reminding. She always said the stew was for anyone who'd forgotten what a home-cooked meal felt like. She looked at her coffee. She made it a lot. He didn't say anything for a long time. The restaurant was very quiet. The city outside was doing its ordinary Friday evening things, cars, voices, the distant music from somewhere down the block that was slightly too loud but not unpleasant. The sign above the door cast its warm orange on the wet spring sidewalk. I want to ask you something, Damien said. Okay. He turned on the stool to face her. And she had seen this man in his skyscraper office, and she had seen him fight in an alley, and she had seen him negotiate the end of a war in a cold warehouse, and she had seen him dice onions in her kitchen at 6 in the morning under her mother's photograph, and none of those versions had looked quite like this, which was a man who had prepared for most things in his adult life and had not prepared for this, and knew it, and had come anyway. He had a ring, not elaborate, not the kind of ring that announces its own expense. A simple thing, clearly chosen rather than defaulted to, which told her something important about the choosing. I asked the wrong question the first time, he said. His voice was even, but there was something underneath the evenness that she recognized as the sound of something undefended. I came here in January thinking I was settling a debt, thinking I owed your mother something I couldn't pay directly, so I'd pay it sideways. He paused. I wasn't looking for someone to stand behind me. I understand that now. She looked at the ring, looked at him. I was looking for someone strong enough to stand beside me, he said. And I found her in a kitchen, hitting someone with a frying pan. Ariana looked at him for a long, real moment. She thought about her mother pulling a teenager off the street in the cold. She thought about 31 years of complicated people eating beef stew and being reminded of what ordinary life tasted like. She thought about the skillet on its hook and the photograph on the wall and the sign above the door and all the things that had been built slowly and honestly and without guarantee. She thought about the fact that Damien Volkov had spent 22 years watching over a diner on Carmody Street because a woman had been kind to him once when she didn't have to be, and that this specific, inconvenient, unchosen faithfulness was the truest thing she knew about him. She took the ring. She turned it in her fingers once. Just once. She slipped it on. "You still have work to do," she said. "I know. A lot of it." "Yes. And it's not going to be clean, and it's not going to be fast, and some days it's going to be—" "I know what it's going to be," he said. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. That was all. That was the whole of it. Outside, the city continued its Friday evening, cars and voices, and the slightly too loud music, and the spring air coming off the lake that smelled, finally, of something other than cold. The iron skillet sign cast its orange on the wet sidewalk, and a couple walked past arm in arm, not looking at anything except each other. And a truck idled at the light, and somewhere down the block someone was laughing about something that Ariana couldn't hear but was loud enough to be good news. She went back to the kitchen. She took the cast iron skillet off its hook and set it on the stove and turned on the burner, because it was a Friday evening and she still had prep for tomorrow, and the skillet had been her mother's, and her mother's rule had been that a good pan shouldn't sit idle. Damien appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in the apron he'd apparently never taken off the hook. "What needs doing?" he said. She handed him a knife. "Onions," she said. He took the knife. He put his index finger on the spine the way she'd shown him. He started to cut. And in the kitchen, where a single cast iron pan had once challenged an empire, the city went on outside and the burner clicked, and the smell of something cooking began to fill the room, ordinary and warm and entirely enough.